Welcome to Late Night Story. When the world goes silent and shadows stretch longer, some stories awaken, whispered only to those still awake. So put on your headphones, turn down the lights, and let me guide you through the quiet hours. If you're listening alone, you're exactly where you need to be. If everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world, don't forget to subscribe before you drift too far into the dark.
Story 1. My neighbors say they've known my son for years. I've never had children. How old must he be now? 8? 9? I stared at my neighbor, unsure what she was asking. She read the confusion on my face. You're a cute little guy. I saw him biking down the lane earlier. He must be old enough for grade 4 now, right? Mrs. Babbage was a bit on the older side, but I never thought she had shown signs of dementia. Not until now. I wasn't exactly sure what to say. She proceeded to stare at me, tilting her head, as if I was the one misremembering. I awkwardly opened my mouth. Oh, right, my little guy. She brightened. Yes, he must be in grade 4, right? Sure. I mean, yes, he is. What a cute little guy, she said, and returned to watering her flowers. It was an odd, slightly sad moment. I wondered if her husband had seen glimmers of this too. I could only hope that this was a momentary blip and not the sign of anything Alzheimer's related. I took the rest of my groceries out of my car and entered home. I had a long day of teaching and I just wanted to sit back, unwind, and watch something light on TV. But as soon as I took off my first shoe, I smelled it. Something burning on the stove. Something burning with lots of cheese on it. The hell? I dashed over to the kitchen and almost fell down, partially because I was wearing only one shoe, but also because there was a scrawny little boy frying Kraft dinner. I let out a half scream, but very quickly I composed myself into the same assertive adult who taught at university. What? Excuse me. Who are you? What are you doing here? The boy's blonde, willow-like hair whipped around his face as he looked at me with equal surprise. Papa, what do you mean? I'm here. He was a scared, confused child, and I couldn't quite place the bizarre inflection of his words. Do you want some KD, Papa? Have some. Was that a Russian accent? It took me a second to realize he was wearing an oversized shirt that looked just like mine. Was he wearing my clothes? I held out my palms like I would at a lecture, my standard, everyone settle down gesture, and clear my throat. I'm sorry. I don't know who you are, or what this is. The boy widened his eyes, still frightened by my intensity. He stirred the food with a wooden spoon. It's KD, Papa, your favorite, chili cheese kind. Don't you remember? His name was Dmitri, and he claimed to be my son. Apparently at some point there had been a mother, but he didn't remember much about her. He only remembered me. You've been Papa my whole life. My whole life, Papa. I tried having a sit-down conversation. In fact, I tried to have many sit-down conversations where I explained to Dmitri that would be impossible, but it always ended with him clutching me with impassioned tears, begging me to remember him. The confusion only got worse when my mother called. How is my grandson doing? She asked. I didn't know how to reply. The conversation grew awkward and tense until eventually I clarified my whole predicament. Mom, what are you talking about? I don't have a son. I've never had a son. My mother gasped a little, then laughed and scolded me, saying I shouldn't joke around like that, because of course I've always had a son. A smart little guy who will be celebrating 9 this weekend. I hung up. I stood petrified in my own kitchen, staring at the strange, expectant Slavic child. For the next 10 minutes, all I could do was ask where his parents were, and he just continued to act frightened, like any authentic kid might, and replied with the same question, How did you forget me, Papa? My method wasn't getting me anywhere, so I decided to play along. I cleared my head with a shot of espresso. I told him my brain must have been scrambled from overworking, and I apologized for not remembering I was his father. He brightened immediately. It's okay, Papa. It's okay. He gave me a hug. You always work so hard. The tension dropped further as Dmitri finished making the noodles and served himself some. I politely declined and watched him eat, and he watched me watch him eat. So you're okay now? You're not angry? His accent was so odd. No, I said, I'm not angry. I was just a little scrambled. His eyes shimmered, looking more expectant. So we can be normal now? A wan chill trickled down my neck. I didn't really know what to say, but for whatever reason, I did not want to say, yes, we can be normal now, because this was not normal. Far from it. This child was not my son. He started playing with his food and quivered a little, like a worried mouse seeking reassurance. Everything will be fine. I eventually said, no need to stress. Enjoy your noodles. To my shock and dismay, I discovered that Dmitri also had his own room. My home office had somehow been replaced by a barren, clay-walled chamber filled with linen curtains, old wooden toys, and a simple bed. The smell of bread and earth wafted throughout. I watched him play with his blocks and spinning tops for about half an hour before he started to yawn and say he wanted to go to sleep. It was the strangest thing, tucking him in. He didn't want to switch to pajamas or anything. He just sort of hopped into his straw bed and asked him to hold his hand. Dimitri's fingers were cold, slightly clammy little things. It was very bizarre, comforting him like my own son, but it appeared to work. He softened and lay still. He didn't ask for any lullaby or bedtime story. He just wanted to hold my hand for a minute. Thank you, Papa. I'm so glad you're here. So glad you can be my Papa. Good night. I inched my way out of the room and watched him through the crack of his door. At about 9:30, he gave small, childlike snores. He had fallen asleep. Cautiously, I called Pat, my coworker with whom I shared close contact. She had the same reaction as my mother. Harlan, of course you have a son. From your marriage to Svetlana. My marriage to who? You met her in Moscow, when you were touring Europe. It was true that I had guest lectured 15 years ago. Across the UK, Germany, and Russia, I was awarded a grant for it. But I only stayed in Moscow for 3 days. I never met anyone named Svetlana. Don't be weird, Harlan, come on. Pat's conviction was very disturbing. You and Svetlana were together for many years. We were? How many? Look, I know the divorce was hard, but you shouldn't pretend your ex-wife doesn't exist. I'm not pretending. I'm being serious. I don't remember her. Then get some sleep. I sipped on my second espresso of the night. But I have slept? I'm fine. Well, then I don't get what this joke is. Knock it off. It's creepy. I'm not joking. I'll see you tomorrow for the birthday. Birthday? Yes, your son's birthday. Jesus Christ. Good night, Harlan. Get some sleep. I didn't sleep that night. My efforts were spent scouring the filing cabinets and drawers throughout my house. I had credit card bills covering school supplies, kids' clothing shops, and costlier groceries. I even had pictures of Dmitri hung around the walls from various ages. It's like everything was conforming to this new reality. The harder I looked for clues to disprove my fatherhood, the more evidence I found confirming it. It was Dmitri who woke me up off the living room couch and said Uncle Boris was here. Uncle Boris? I peeked through the window and could see a very large blond man smiling back at me. Behind him was a gaggle of other relatives, all speaking Russian to each other. Hello, Harlan. The blond man's voice penetrated past the glass. We are here for birthday. They all looked excited and motioned to the front door. They were all wearing tunics and leggings. Traditional birthday clothes, or something. I was completely floored. I didn't know what to do, so I just sort of nodded and subtly slinked back into my kitchen. Dmitri came to pull at my arm. Come on, Papa. We have to let them in. I don't know any of them. Yes, you do, Papa. It's Uncle Boris. It's Uncle Boris. I yanked my hand away. It was one thing to pretend I was this kid's dad for a night. It was quite another to let a group of strangers into my house first thing in the morning. Dmitri frowned. I'll open the door. Wait. Hold on. I grabbed Dmitri's shoulder. He turned away. Let go. I tried to pull him back, but then he dragged me into the living room again. Our struggle was on display for everyone outside. Boris looked at me with saucer eyes. Dmitri pulled harder, and I had no choice but to pull harder back. The boy hit his head on a table as he fell. Boris yelled something in Russian. Someone else hollered back. I heard hands trying to wrench open my door. Dmitri stopped. I said, "Let's just take a minute to." "You're hurting me, Papa." "Oi!" My front door unlocked. Footsteps barreled inside. I let go of my son and watched 3 large Slavic men enter my house with stern expressions. Dmitri hid behind them. "Is everything okay?" Boris peered down at me through his tangle of blonde hair. "Yes. Sorry," I said, struggling to find words. "I'm just very confused." "Confused? Why were you hitting Dmitri?" The little boy pulled on his uncle's arm and whispered something into his ear. Boris's expression furrowed. But before I could speak further, a slender pair of arms pushed aside all the male figures and revealed a woman with unwavering, bloodshot eyes. Something in me knew it was her. Svetlana. She wore a draped brown sheet as a dress, with skin so pale I could practically see her sinews and bones. It's like she had some extreme form of albinism. "Harlan," she said, somehow breaking my name into 3 syllables. "Harlan." I've never been so instinctively afraid of a person in my life. It's like she had weaved herself out of the darkest edges of memory. I saw flashes of her holding my waist in Moscow, outside Red Square. Flashes of her lips whispering chants in the shadows of St. Basil's Cathedral. Svetlana held Dmitri's shoulder, then looked up at me. "Just tell him it will be normal. Tell him everything will be normal." No, this is not happening. None of this is real. Barefoot, and still wearing the same clothes as yesterday, I bolted out the back of my house and hurtled towards my driveway before the rest of my new family could realize what was going on. I hopped into my Subaru and stepped on the gas. As I drove away from my house, I looked back into my rearview mirror, and I swear it didn't look like my house at all. I swear it looked like a thatched roof hut. Back at the university, I walled myself up in my study. I canceled all speaking arrangements for the next week, saying I needed a few personal days. No one in my department knew I had a son. Nothing in my study indicated I had an extended Russian family. When I asked Pat about our phone conversation last night, her response was, "What conversation?" My mom said the same thing, with immense trepidation. I returned to my house the following day, and after setting foot back inside, I knew that everything had reverted back to the way it was before. No more framed pictures of Dmitri. No more alarming photo albums. And that clay-walled room where Dmitri spun tops and slept inside. It was just my home office again. To this day, I still have no clue what happened during that bizarre September weekend. But doing some of my own research, I'm starting to think I did encounter something in Moscow all those years ago. Some kind of lingering old curse, or a stray spirit. Or a Chernaya Vedma, a black witch disguised as an ordinary woman. Although I haven't seen any evil things bubble up around my place since. Every now and then I do have a conversation with Mrs. Babbage, and she seems to remember my son very well. Such a cute little guy, always waving hello. Did you know he offered me food once? I think it was Kraft dinner. Story 2. I'm seeing things at the laundromat. I'm making this post right now because I need people to know about the experience that I had earlier this morning. I don't know what to believe or who to talk to, and I'm really scared. My wife works early in the morning and usually goes to bed between 11 and midnight. I am in between jobs, currently unemployed, and studying for my real estate license exams. In other words, I'm on my own schedule, and therefore can afford to stay up till 5 in the morning and sleep until noon if I want to. This usually ends up being the case. I am a natural night owl, more than any person I know. Like I said, my wife normally goes to bed around midnight, after which I will proceed to stay up for several more hours on my own. Sometimes I'll sit in bed and watch YouTube right next to her until I get tired. Other times I'll go into the living room of our small student apartment and watch a scary movie or something. She usually won't want to watch those with me anyway, so this works out great. The consequence of staying up until all hours and being the rabid horror fan I am is that I become very paranoid. The lack of sleep, mixed with my often overactive imagination, has led me to be almost always looking over my shoulder. Ever since I was 10, I've had a sinking feeling that someone, somewhere is always out to get me. My slight paranoia has often been the thousands of jokes from my wife, friends, and family, but I don't blame them. It can be something as harmless as a man sitting alone at a restaurant, and I will stare him down just so he knows I'm on to him. When I think about it, it's a pretty dumb and weird thing to do, but for me it's near instinctual. No, I don't blame their teasing at all. If you saw my behavior and appearance for yourself, all adds up. I have a gaunt, wide-eyed expression at all times. When I walk home from campus alone at night, my head snaps to the side at the slightest noise, like a trained hunting dog smelling for squirrels. I like to say that my guard is always up, but the truth is that I am irrationally terrified of the world. One of the weirdest things I've started doing this last year is staring through the peephole of our front door for hours on end. It'll be well past midnight, pitch black in our apartment, my wife in the next room, and I will just sit and watch. For what? I'm not sure. Intruders? Thieves maybe? We live in the cheapest student housing available, but still, someone could come by. I'm telling you all these things about myself in hopes that someone can talk me down from the fear I feel regarding what I saw last night. I want someone to tell me that I'm crazy, that I'm imagining things, and that I should seek help. The night before last, my wife and I were cleaning our apartment and needed to do some laundry, which I volunteered to do. The laundromat in our complex is close enough to walk to, but if the weather is ever bad enough, you could justify taking a car. Sometime in the afternoon, I walked to the laundromat, put our clothes in the wash, and later moved them to the dryer. I came and went that afternoon, spent the last of our laundry quarters, and everything was fine. We had friends over that night, and they didn't leave until just before midnight. The night passed like any other, as did the next day. Every night, when my wife goes to bed early, at least by my standards, I usually like to sit in bed with her and talk or cuddle as she drifts off to sleep. On this particular night, being the responsible one in our marriage, she reminded me that we had forgotten to get the clothes out of the dryer. She asked if I could go get them, and pointed out that by this point, our clothes had been sitting in the dryer for almost 2 days. I protested at first, saying it was too late now, and that I'd get them tomorrow. Now here's the thing, I'm a paranoid scaredy cat. I can admit it, but our laundromat would be considered creepy by anyone. It's got this eerie green lighting. The road outside has a street light that flickers in the dark, and there's something weird with the doors that seems to block out all outside noise, creating a creepy, dead silence. My wife asked me again nicely, pointing out that I would be up anyway, and that she didn't want to risk our clothes getting set in lost and found. I agreed with her good points and relented. I would head over later that night. For the next few hours, I wrestled with myself and my fear about leaving. On one side, I was creeped out, but on the other, we didn't need to get our clothes. We needed to get them soon, but my cowardice was winning me over. It wasn't until 4:45 a.m. that I finally got myself to leave the apartment. I stepped outside and was immediately hit with a chill. It had been raining for the last few hours. The smell of rain and pavement perfumed my nostrils as I made my way to my dewdrop car, and I pulled out of the parking lot, saying, "Let's get this over with," to myself. As I said, the laundromat is close enough to walk, but no way in hell I wasn't taking the car. I got there in literally 45 seconds. The laundromat was exactly as I described it earlier, eerily bright and quiet. It looked like a hospital room scene in a haunted attraction. I quickly made my way over to the dryer machine that I had put our clothes in the night before, quickly and frantically throwing it all into our laundry bag. The laundromat was unnaturally warm for an empty building at 4 a.m., and I wasn't planning on being there any longer than I had to. Then I heard something that I will never forget. I heard a scratchy, vile, high-pitched voice call out, "Hello." My blood turned to ice at the sound of it. Every hair stood on end. My fists instinctively curled into fists. It sounded like a sick person. The voice was coming from the other side of the wall, where the washing machines were. And so, I couldn't see how close it was or what it even was. The voice let out two distinct, low groaning sounds that sounded like an old vacuum cleaner, and then continued. Are you as filthy as me? The voice then dipped from high to low. Are you? It wasn't low like Darth Vader. It sounded like a kid trying to do a low voice, like they were doing it in a mocking way. I cannot put into words how horrible this voice was. I could grow to be a 90-year-old man and still have nightmares about it. It was unlike any person or animal I had ever heard. All I could do was toss the rest of our crap into the laundry bag and pray that whatever the hell was making that voice was on the phone with someone or maybe pulling a prank. I didn't bother shutting the dryer door, and I didn't run either. The thought of laying eyes on whatever was making that voice felt as unbearable as hell itself. But I had to try. I gripped my keys in between my fingers, trying to create makeshift brass knuckles. I quickly walked out from behind the wall, bracing myself for some kind of horrible confrontation. But there was nothing there. Literally nothing and nobody. I let out a sharp exhale of relief, nearly crying in the process. I didn't know what had made those noises, if I had imagined it or not, and I didn't want to find out. I quickly walked out of the building and started my car. As I started my car, I looked up and saw, quite possibly, the worst sight I will ever see in my life. In the large window of the laundromat, I saw a terrible, evil thing. It was a man, I suppose, but I had never seen a man like this. It had wild blondish hair that was matted, pokey, and greasy. I could only see it from the shoulders up, but it was awfully bony and thin. It had eyes like a rat that stared into my soul and made me feel unsafe. It wore a hospital gown that, to my surprise, was clean and nearly spotless from what I briefly saw. Worst of all, though, were its lips. They looked blistered and cracked, and stained red. They weren't bold red like a clown, but rather faded red like dried blood. It just stared at me with some kind of unnatural, bored smile, its small black eyes digging into my very being. It had both of its scrawny hands placed on its hollow cheeks, and was stretching its face at me, pulling its skin tight, baring its teeth and causing its little eyes to squint. It looked like something out of the worst of my nightmares. Then, without warning, it started running. It took a sharp right, and started running down the hallway toward the exit where I was parked. I could see it sprinting through the windows at breakneck speed. Panicking, I attempted to jam my keys into the ignition, but wound up dropping them, of course, like my life depended on it. I quickly bent down to grab them off the car floor, my breath picking up speed like a train. I sat back up, and the thing was right outside my window, pressed against the glass of my door. It was still pulling at its face, making the most horrible expression. Its fingernails were yellow and infected. The skin around its neck was covered in little boils and tiny dark holes. Its teeth copper-colored, and its gums rotten and frothy. Worst of all, however, it was me. This thing, its face, it was my face. It was like a twisted version of my reflection staring back at me. Its eyes still black and tiny, its face still stretched, but it was me. It even had the same triangle-shaped birthmark that I have over my left eyebrow. I screamed as the thing hit my car window, shattering it and getting glass all over me. I screamed and screamed with tears in my eyes as I quickly reversed the car, putting a few feet of space between me and the thing. While I was putting it in drive, the creature stared at me with a face that both was and wasn't mine, now with blood and glass shards all over it, sticking out of its skin from my window. It just sat and stared, its untainted hospital gown fluttering in the early morning wind. I stepped on the gas and got the hell out of there. I swear I almost had a damn panic attack and crashed the car. I must have driven around town for 45 minutes before I headed back for home. I quickly parked the car and ran into our apartment. It was just under 6 a.m., and the sun was beginning to peek over the horizon. I closed and locked the front door and fell to my knees. I want to cry or throw up, or both. Looking back, I might have been in shock, but I'm not exactly sure what I was feeling even at the point of me writing this. I sat on the couch, caught my breath, and cried a little before eventually falling asleep. My wife woke me up for a goodbye kiss before she went to work, and asked me why I had slept on the couch. At this point, I was running on about 3 hours of sleep, and so my answer was pretty much gibberish, but I lied and said it was too hot in our room. The events that had happened only a few hours earlier came flooding back to me in my sleep-deprived delirium, and my heart started to beat at rabbit speed again. What was at the laundromat last night? Did I imagine all of that? Was it a result of sleep deprivation and paranoia? Is there someone dangerous hiding out in our complex? Should I tell someone? Who will believe me? Am I safe? Why did it look like me? I don't know what to do. Should I talk to the police or at least campus security? I know I'll sound insane if I share too many details. Should I start talking to a therapist? Would a therapist believe me? Should I tell my wife? Would she even believe me? I'm not sure if I believe me. I'm more stressed than I've ever been, but there's one thing I do know for sure. After she left for work, I heard my wife walk past where I'd parked my car and say, "What the hell?" Story 3. There's a man who keeps showing up outside of my window, and he keeps making baby noises. It started 2 weeks ago. The faint cries of a baby coming from outside my window, probably 50 or so feet into my backyard, which my window overlooks. At first, I was able to turn my fan up and block it out, but after a couple of nights, it grew louder or closer. Attempts to look out my window failed to find its source, and it was far too loud now to try to ignore. Finally, one night, I saw the silhouette of a man and I seized my chance. After throwing on a coat and slippers to go meet this creep, I suddenly realized how dangerous this was. Some strange man making crying baby sounds in my backyard. I grabbed my baseball bat and proceeded to the back door. When I opened the back door, a wall of rain greeted me. It was pouring, sheets of water slapping against the porch and pooling around my feet. Moments ago, the sky had been clear. Now it felt like a storm had rolled in just for me. I tightened my grip on the bat and stepped out, the cold soaking through my slippers almost instantly. "Hey!" I shouted into the dark. The word barely made it past my lips. The rain swallowed it whole, turning my voice into a muffled echo that died before it reached the trees. Through the curtain of water, I could just make out the silhouette again, standing exactly where the cries had come from. Motionless, watching, I raised the bat and slammed it against the fence, the sharp crack cutting through the rain. "I'm warning you," I shouted, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. "Get the hell out of here." The figure didn't move at first, just stood there, drenched and still. Then slowly, he turned and walked off into the darkness, his outline fading behind the curtain of rain until it was gone. I stayed there for a moment, listening. Nothing but the downpour. My heart was hammering, but I told myself it was over. I went back inside, locked the door, and peeled off my soaked slippers. By the time I lay back down, the steady hum of my fan almost lulled me into thinking it had been a dream. Then the crying started again, louder this time, sharper. I froze. It was right outside my window. My hand shook as I reached for the blinds, the sound growing more grotesque with every second. I yanked them open, and there he was. His face was pressed against the glass, rainwater streaking down the pale, sickly skin. His eye sockets were sunken and dark, like pits carved into his skull, and that smile, wide, unnatural, stretching ear to ear, warped as he let out another wailing, infant-like cry. I stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of my rug as I scrambled for my phone. My hand was shaking so hard I almost dropped it. "There's someone outside my house." I yelled into the receiver. The operator tried to calm me down, said officers were on their way, but every second felt like an hour. I kept my eyes locked on the window the whole time. The man didn't move, just kept pressing his face against the glass, that awful grin frozen in place. Then, as the wail of distant sirens finally reached my ears, he turned and vanished into the dark. The police took forever to arrive. By then, the rain had stopped completely. The air was heavy and still, the kind of silence that feels wrong after a storm. They swept the yard, checked the fence, even looked around the trees. Nothing, just muddy footprints leading up to my window. Prints that seemed to fade and disappear halfway back toward the woods. They told me it was probably a prank, maybe someone passing through. I nodded and pretended to believe them. When they left, The house felt emptier than ever. I lay back down, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was over. For a while, it was quiet. Then came the sound again, the baby's cry. Closer. I sat up, furious and terrified all at once. Enough, I muttered, flipping on the light. That's when I saw them, muddy footprints. Fresh, leading across my carpet, right up to the closet door. The crying was louder now, coming from inside. I stood there staring at the closet, my breath shallow. The sound of that awful crying still leaking out from behind the door. My hand tightened around the bat as I took slow, cautious steps forward, the floorboards creaking under my feet. When I finally reached the handle, I hesitated, just long enough to hate myself for it, then yanked the door open. The crying stopped. Inside, on the closet floor, lay something small and wet. I squinted, leaning closer. It wasn't a baby. It wasn't even human. It was a tiny, half-formed bird, pink skin stretched thin, its wings barely developed, trembling slightly as if still alive. A baby bird fetus. I stumbled back, disgusted and confused. What the hell? I whispered, my voice cracking. The smell hit me next, something sour and metallic, and I covered my mouth, trying not to gag. Then a sound from behind me made my blood run cold. Thud. I whipped my head around. My bed had moved, bouncing once, hard enough to rattle the frame. Another thud. Then the blanket began to shift, as if something underneath was crawling, pushing its way up. The fabric stretched and lifted, slowly spreading over a single, human-sized lump right in the center. A baby's cry suddenly shot into my ear, so sharp and close it felt like it came from inside my head, right against my eardrum. The sound burst through me, rupturing something deep within. I screamed and clutched my ear as warm blood began to run down my neck, thick and hot against my skin. Still half bent over, I stared at the bed. The lump under the blanket was moving again, slowly rising and falling as if it were breathing. I didn't have my bat. I dropped it somewhere near the closet, and my phone was my only weapon left. I grabbed it, but the screen was dead, black, reflecting only my shaking face. Panic took over. Without thinking, I hurled at the bed. The second it hit, a pale, bony hand shot out from beneath the blanket, impossibly fast. It snatched the phone midair and slammed it down onto the floor, the crack of shattering glass echoing through the room. Then came the sounds again, high-pitched, gurgling baby noises, layered and distorted, as if dozens of tiny throats were crying all at once from inside the mattress. Suddenly, the blanket began to bulge and writhe. One by one, tiny shapes pushed their way out from underneath, then tumbled on the floor with wet, heavy thuds. Dozens of them, ash-white babies, their skin almost translucent under the light, eyes sealed shut yet still crying, each sound piercing and unnatural. They began crawling toward me, their little limbs jerking in unnatural rhythm, their cries overlapping into a deafening chorus. I stumbled back, kicking at the floor, but there were too many. Cold, slick hands clung to my legs, my arms, my clothes. I tried to scream as they climbed higher, their mouths opening wide, too wide, and then the biting started. Tiny teeth sank into my skin, my arms, my neck, my face. I swung and thrashed, but they just kept coming, the room echoing with the shrill, endless sound of crying. And then everything stopped. The sound, the movement, the pain. The room was still. The biting, the screaming, all of it gone. I blinked through tears and blood, chest heaving, and realized sunlight was slipping to the blinds. Morning. The floor was empty. No babies. No hand. Just the wreckage of my room. Blood on the carpet. My shattered phone beside the bed, and muddy prints fading into nothing. I don't remember much after that. I managed to get myself to the hospital, where they treated my wounds and ran tests. The cuts didn't make sense, they said, but they stitched me up and told me to rest. Now I'm home again. The house feels too quiet. My ear still throbs where the drum burst, and I swear sometimes I can hear faint cry when I close my eyes. The sun's going down soon, and I'm scared of what tonight has to bring. Story 4. I guarded a live asset in a military lab. I should have turned the work down. Take it from me. Some jobs aren't worth doing no matter how good the money is, or how much shit you're willing to overlook for the sake of an easy life. I've worked the doors of more dive bars, brothels, and bad businesses, and I can count. Seen things that would make a better man quit. People fighting to bloody unconsciousness in the street. Kids ODing while passers-by stepped over or around them. Women drunk and spewing in the gutter, and still being ushered in by club owners hanging over them like mosquitoes on stale water. Dead men frozen to death for want of home, while folks line up only a few feet away to spend their money on booze and the warm. I saw all this and kept on working with my head down. Never complained as long as my pay ended up in my wallet. And it's taken me this long to be sorry for that. I was not a good man, and I knew it. It was my lack of any moral scruples at that time that landed me a security gig at a military lab. The wage was good and the work was easy, and that was all I cared to know. My job was to guard a live specimen they had living in the back room of the building. The only action I saw from day to day being to let scientists or the orderlies responsible for feeding and clean up in or out. It was quiet, repetitive labor, the kind I liked. I liked the other guards on duty, too. The guys that ended up doing most of my shifts with me were around my age, leading me to fall in with them and their way of joking around to keep things interesting on slow days. Had I known what I do now, I would have kept my distance from them, stayed alert and discouraged that kind of horseplay. But in the end, I was as much to blame for what went down as they were, and maybe even a little more. Still, sometimes I wonder if what happened to us was inevitable, a secondary experiment set up by the military without our knowledge. Maybe we were chosen for our youth. The conditions we worked in purposefully built with far less protections than we were led to believe. At this point, nothing would shock me less. And intentional or not, I'm sure those scientists were grateful for their findings. The animal in the room we were guarding had come from a forest somewhere. The locals in that anonymous location, generally suspicious of any military presence in the area, had supposedly lead representatives right into the creature's habitat, suggesting that it had been a nuisance to them that they were glad to be rid of. Now, it was a military asset and effectively their prisoner, though to this day, I don't know if that thing was aware enough to realize it, or if it did, to care. Every few days, we guards were required to release the complex lock system on the cell door to allow scientists through to conduct their experiments with the creature, or, more accurately, with the unlucky men and women they brought into that room with them, hostages, I guess, or long-term jailbirds hoping to reduce their sentences by volunteering to take part in human trials. They'd be dragged out of that cell sweaty and staggering, clearly affected by some influence within. I figured the creature was being used as some form of living torture device, though it never moved much except when the orderlies brought in live rats or insects for it to eat, which it did slowly and without any visible interest in its handlers. For this reason, none of U.S. on security were particularly afraid of it, though we knew more or less what it could do. We'd witnessed both janitors and scientists go in with headphones over their ears, which we were also required to wear when opening the doors. From watching through a reinforced glass panel, we deduced that the creature made some sound that affected the poor saps brought in to meet it. You'd see its body trembling as they entered. The rudimentary hole it had as a mouth falling open over its flat teeth. Its back legs would rub together, and not knowing the difference between a grasshopper or any other kind of insect behavior, everybody on security took to calling it Jiminy Cricket, or sometimes just Jim. They're going in with Jim, we'd say to each other whenever we got a call through to prepare the doors for scientists and their human subjects to pass. Poor bastard doesn't know what he's in for. Neither did we. Our guesswork never even came close. Through the long, quiet hours in between test days, my team and I would end up talking about the thing that we were guarding. Kidding around, really. Mainly to shuck off some of the unease that came of extended period alone with our charge. While we weren't scared of it, per se, it wasn't comfortable to look at. The cricket had an oily, hard-shelled exterior, its bald head eyeless, but vaguely humanoid. Its limbs might have been, too, only all six were folded backwards like a bug's and tapered into fingerless ends. The creature was smaller than the average man, or looked to be until the fleshy brown sheets it had as wings opened out, which they sometimes did while it ate, taking up half the wall. The cricket could have overpowered any of its keepers easily if it wanted to, but I guess it hadn't the smarts to try. or else it had enough to know it was onto a good thing getting food and board with so little effort on its part. No one on security knew much about it except what we could see for ourselves. The docs wouldn't tell us anything and shut us down whenever we tried to ask. As far as we knew, the only risk the creature posed to human beings was the cry it made when anyone approached, and even then the symptoms appeared to be temporary, wearing off as the subjects were led away from a room. At that point, we hadn't heard the noise ourselves due to the mandatory headphones, as well as the walls and doors of the cell being heavily soundproofed. We wanted to know what exactly could be so bad about it that grown adults would start retching and crawling around on the floor to get away from it, and there was no way of finding out without experiencing it with our own ears. It didn't occur to us that it was better to leave our curiosities well alone. We were all barely more than kids at the time, bored and stupid, and worn down by all we'd seen into a dangerous apathy. Besides, the human subjects had always come out of that room alive, and so we had no reason to think the sound would cause any lasting damage. One shift, we started seriously planning how to go about our personal experiment without being fired. We had full control over security cameras, which would be switched on or off from outside the room, as well as the lock system, making it easy for us to enter and exit rapidly and so avoid being caught. My youngest colleague, Carson, volunteered to go in first. At 22, he looked a good 5 years younger, stood bouncing on his heels and whistling, full of adrenaline. "Let me in, boys," he said. "I'm ready." We did as we were told, the heavy doors sliding apart as we released the locks, then closing at Carson's back. Watching him through a glass panel, my other colleague Stanmare, and I made mocking gestures at him, our headphones secured over our ears. We were all confident he'd be in and out quicker than the regular subjects, who only ended up in the cell for so long, because we kept the doors shut fast against their pounding fists and mouthed pleas for freedom. Carson would be out in seconds, we thought, with a sore head for his troubles and nothing more. He grinned at us over his shoulder, taking narrow steps toward the cricket until it shifted on the wall. "Look at that asshole," Stanmare commented fondly. I only knew what he said from reading his lips. He was going to regret this. Just watch. The cricket's mouth opened, and even from a distance and behind thick glass, we could see its weird limbs rattling together. Though I couldn't hear it, I felt a sort of vibration through my skull, and glancing at Stanmare, I knew he felt it too. "Here we go," I said. "It's singing." Carson was listening, stood with his back to us in a kind of trance. This wasn't unusual for initial subject reactions, so Stanmare and I just chuckled a little, nudging each other back and forth. Then Carson started twitching violently like a body caught in a hail of gunfire, and dropped to the floor, making no attempt to claw to the exit the way we'd all agreed to when it got too much. It occurred to me as I watched him convulse that he wasn't fully conscious, that none of the subjects had been until they'd been pulled up onto their feet, and beyond the doors, beyond the cricket song. It was when I saw the dark stain spreading through Carson's pants and across the steel tile floor that I knew for sure he was out of it. "Shit," I said, and facing, Stanmare added, "Go in and get him. I'll stay out here and get the doors." I reopened the cell and stepped aside before Stanmare had the chance to complain about it. He mouthed something at me, then, realizing I couldn't understand him, just shrugged and went on in, unaffected by the cricket. Stanmare walked directly to Carson and grabbed him under both arms in order to drag his dead weight toward the exit. The moment he put his hands on him, Carson's slack body started seizing and kicking all over again, his jaw dropping open in what I could only assume was a scream. Stanmare did his best to keep on pulling him over to the door, and almost succeeded until one of Carson's flailing arms hit him in the ear, knocking his headphones off onto the floor. Immediately he went rigid, his face twisting towards the creature with an expression of horror unlike anything I'd seen outside of a movie, rather than drop like Carson. Stammer's response was to continue hauling our friend towards the door with one hand, the other scrambling to pick up the headphones and drag them back down over his ears again. I couldn't tell whether the two of them were in physical pain, nauseated, or had gone crazy with fear. I figured it was all three at once, and understood that if I left them in that cell any longer, I could end up with two stiffs on my hands. I'd have to explain away to our higher-ups. Again, I activated the lock release, moving back as the two men collapsed through the entryway, breathing too hard to speak. When I bent down to help Carson onto his feet, he grasped at my face, wrenching one ear of the headphones off me and pointing with his other hand at the creature on the wall. "Listen," he said, or I think he did. I could barely hear him over its noise. "You better fucking listen, too." Later he'd tell me that hurt and spite had driven him to do what he'd done, that he couldn't bear the idea of any one of us getting away unscathed. He said he couldn't remember exactly what he'd experienced in the noise, wouldn't until much later, when everything went to shit, but that he was sorry. Anyway, I think he meant it. Then, I really think he did. Still, I resented him for forcing me to listen even when I understood why. In the few seconds the headphones left my ears, I heard the cricket's song, more like the guttural hum of many men together than any kind of insect. Under was a dull whining that seemed to stab through my ear and out through my eye with an agony so deep I would have beaten my brains out of my skull on the floor to be rid of it. Still, the worst of that sound was not what I heard, but the things it put into my head. Thoughts that, like my colleagues, I forget even as we lay sweating and cursing against the locked door of that cell. I remember the terror of that imagery, the horror and disgust with myself for being able to conceive of such things. And I remember that I'd enjoyed some of what I'd glimpsed, had wanted it to go on, and end with the same crazed strength. How I got out of there and locked up, I still don't know, only that I was the one to do it. Later it was Stanmare that, with headphones safely secured, cleaned up the inside of the cell and helped Carson get himself together. The kid was almost mute, shaking and chucking his guts up in the nearest bathroom for almost 2 hours. Once our shift was over, the three of us stood smoking together by our cars, our hands trembling like we were drunk. "What did you see, Mac?" asked Carson. I looked hard at him but saw nothing but an innocent questioning in his eyes. "Hell if I know," I said. "But if I'd hung around in there like you, I would have been in a wooden box by tomorrow. I can tell you that much. You want to know what I think? The military is going to kill with that cricket, and they're going to take out however many civilians are in hearing range of their targets. They won't give a damn." Carson looked like he might pass out again. "Come on, guys, we knew who we were working for," said Stanmare. "Don't act like you didn't see something like this coming." But he said it gently, with sympathy. He'd experienced the sound too, after all, and had hated it as much as we had. "We should quit," said Carson. "I ain't sticking around. This is too fucked up. I'm out." I would have gladly gone with him, but I couldn't admit it. "If we drop out this early into the game, the bosses know something's up," I said. "And if they know we're bailing with classified information on our hands, we're all in deep shit. We need to lie low for a while. Play it cool." It seemed unfair to point out that Stanmare and I wouldn't have heard anything at all if Carson hadn't freaked the way he did, though both of us were thinking it. We knew he'd taken the cricket song the hardest, and we couldn't kick him while he was down. "Christ," said Carson queasily. "I don't know if I can do this." "Tough shit," said Stanmare, and flicked a cigarette away into the snow. "We were dumb enough to open that door. We gotta be smart enough to see this shit out to the end." So we kept working at the lab for another couple of weeks without event, though Carson was jumpy and looked green around the gills every time we opened the door for the cleaners or the next sorry subject to be sent in. He couldn't even bring himself to look through the glass panel anymore. Stanmare became fascinated with it. He'd always have his face to that window, his breath steaming it white. I heard the locals used to put tree gum in their ears, so the cricket couldn't get to them, Stanmare said once. "The noise is to keep competition out of its territory, or some shit. Must be more of them out there, somewhere." I looked at the cheap paint job on the wall, and tried to ignore him, hoping that if I did he'd drop the subject. By then I decided the less I knew about that creature the better, wishing I'd minded my business like I had all those other times before. It was 5 a.m. on a Monday that I got an unexpected phone call just before my alarm went off for a rare morning shift. Cursing, I answered my cell. "Stanmare," I said, "you've got to be fucking with me." "What is it?" "Look at social media, man," he said. "You still got accounts, right? Any of them? Open them up. Check the news articles. Now." His voice was dull and dark. I'd never heard him talk that way before, and it sent something through me deeper than cold. I pulled up one of my barely used profiles online and started to scroll. Immediately the same headline was being shared by every page and person I followed. I clicked a link to one of the articles and sat reading it in the early morning darkness. There had been a mass shooting in an office block in the next town over. Every man and woman leaving after work gunned down before they had the chance to comprehend what was happening. Even the security had been taken out. The shooter had access to all the doors and an in-depth understanding of the building's layout and weak points. The young man had entered, slaughtering the occupants in relative silence until police had arrived at the scene, hoping to apprehend him. At this point, the shooter, covered in blood and visibly distressed for the first time since the incident began, started shouting at the officers from an open window. "I saw it," he said. "I heard it, and then I saw it. I wanted it. I didn't want to, but I did. I wanted to do it." Then he'd turned the gun on himself and had blown a bullet through one ear and out his left eye, dying instantly. I couldn't stop replaying the clips that had been taken from the scene, pausing on that bulge-eyed, tormented face, a face I knew, had seen daily at my side for months on end, smiling and laughing. I didn't dare bring the shooting up at the lab, where Stan Mayer and I regarded Carson's replacement in distrustful silence. Only after our shift had ended did we even mention his name, crammed knee to knee in a tiny bar at the fringes of town. He must have been fired from security at that office years ago. I said, try and pretend that I hadn't been dissecting and analyzing Carson's dying words obsessively all morning. Must have had a grudge. Decided to go back and see it through. "Nah," said Stan Mayer, shaking his head. "Maybe that's the way they'll spin it." But he never worked there a day in his life. Never even knew shit about it until he went in with Jim that day. See, Carson turned up at my place last night, just before it all went down. Asked if I remembered anything else about that cricket. I said no, and how I planned on keeping it that way. So that's when Carson told me it was all coming back to him. When the cricket sung to him, he started seeing flashes of what he was going to do at that office building. Knew how to get there, how to get around, even how he'd feel doing it. The murder, how he'd kill himself when it was over. Hell, he said he even liked the idea, even though he swore he never thought that way before. He said he was scared he was going to drive out there and do it that same night. Like shit you are. I said, what would you go and shoot a bunch of people for just because some bug in a cage told you to? The way he looked at me, Jesus, I'm getting chills just thinking about it. He had those crazy eyes, you know? That smile. I want to do it, he said. I know how good it's going to be. Just as sweet as that song. Then I swear he started humming, and it was like that cricket sounded, all those voices. But it was just him standing there. Stan Mayer took a drink, looking at his glass like he wished he'd never get to the end of it. Why the fuck didn't you tell me sooner? I asked him. We could have done something. Stopped him. I took Carson's gun, said Stan Mayer. Made him promise to go and see a doctor in the morning. He calmed down. Seemed like I got through to him, you know? But I guess he had another gun somewhere and just went out of town instead and did just what he said he would. I pushed my own glass away, sickened by it. Jesus, I said, so, what? You think the cricket made him go crazy? That he wouldn't have done it if he hadn't gone in there with it? Stan Mayer made a face. I ain't saying that. I think it brought it out of him. Found something in his head. Just a dark thought like we all have. Sometimes, potentially, no? And instead of being just a thought, suddenly it was something he wanted. I swallowed back a thick ball of saliva and stood up. Well, you better tell me if you start remembering that shit in the lab, all right? If you start wanting to shoot anybody. Hell, I'll tie you down if I have to. Just talk, you hear me? Stan Mayer laughed uncomfortably. He wasn't the opening up to people type, more the quiet kind that stepped in when others needed something from him. Sure, said Stan Mayer. Same to you, Mac. I mean it. Stan Mayer held his hands up in defeat. All right, fuck, I swear it. I don't remember a damn thing I saw when Jim was singing, but if I do, you'll be the first to know. I wasn't. A week later, it was Stan Mayer's face I saw in the news in an old photograph of him and his wife Amelia, laughing together on a trip they'd taken the previous year. One night, Stan Mayer had taken a knife to bed with him and stuck it in and out of Amelia. So many times that when the cops turned up, they couldn't tell if the thing on a mattress with him was even human until they saw the bones. After killing his wife, Stan Mayer had driven that same blade to his own ear with such force and at such a severe angle that it had emerged through his left eye. Shouldn't have been possible, the professional stated, but he'd done it all the same. News reports claimed that there had been text messages recovered between Stan Mayer and his wife where he discussed having violent thoughts, and that he was handing in his notice at work and moving out of the family home until they passed. Amelia had begged him to stay, saying they'd see a doctor together, and so he'd come home and promptly murdered her. The same old story. People said a jealous husband turned like that. It was never out of the blue. They'd find some hint in his past if they went looking, and then it'd all make sense. But though maybe there was a streak of that kind of violence in Stan Mayer, I knew what had brought it out of him. Imagine him humming under his breath as he'd driven up to the house that night. A hum like many voices in one. Something's gonna come out of me too, soon, if I don't make a move. I'm going back to that lab again tomorrow for one reason, and that's to put a pair of those headphones on and shoot that cricket through whatever soft spot in its shell I can find. Maybe that'll stop what's happening to me. Maybe it won't. If it does, the military will probably find a way to get rid of me. Anyway, something quiet and convenient you'll never hear about. But I've made my peace with that. I've started thinking about my mother, you see, and how I've always hated her. I know how I'd kill her if I did it, and I know that would feel good to me. Story 5. The family rule of 3 knocks. It wasn't a fancy rule, written on parchment or anything. It wasn't even something we talked about often. It was just a thing we knew, my wife Clara and I, a piece of unspoken family law as fundamental as looking both ways before crossing the street. If you hear 3 knocks at the door and no one is there, you do not acknowledge it. You don't say, "Who's there?" You don't go to the window and peek out. You absolutely do not, under any circumstances, open the door. You just go about your business. You pretend it was a house settling or a kid playing a prank, and you wait for the feeling to pass. We'd each heard it a handful of times over the years living in our little split level on the edge of town. A trio of sharp, polite raps that would cut through the evening quiet. Knock, knock, knock. Always evenly spaced. Always at the front door. The first time it happened to me, I was the one who broke the rule. I was alone watching the game. I shouted, "Yeah, hang on," and muted the TV. My hand was on the cool brass of the knob when I looked through the peephole at an empty porch. A faint, sweet smell, like a bouquet of old flowers left in wet soil, leaped into the house. I wrote it off as a prank, but later, when I went to check the lock, my fingers came away from the metal slightly damp and cold, as if someone with endlessly sweating skin had been gripping it from the other side. Clara told me the rule after it happened to her. "It's just one of those things," she'd said, not looking up from the shirt she was folding. "You hear it, you ignore it. It goes away. Mom said if you acknowledge it, you invite it in." It sounded like superstitious nonsense, the kind of thing you laugh about but quietly obey. So we obeyed. We heard the knocks, we froze, and then we deliberately turned up the volume on the TV. It always worked. The feeling of being watched would fade, and the night would return to normal. The problem started about a month after our son Leo turned 2. It was a Tuesday. I was giving Leo his bath before bed. He was splashing happily, driving a plastic tugboat through the sudsy water. The bathroom door was open a crack, and down the hall, I could hear Clara loading the dishwasher. Then the knocks came. Knock, knock, knock. They were perfectly clear, cutting through the domestic sounds like a scalpel. Leo stopped his playing. His little head swiveled toward the bathroom door, his eyes wide. My own heart clenched. We looked at each other, me and my son, in a moment of shared, silent understanding. The rule was in effect. "Clara," I called out, my voice tighter than I intended. "I heard it," she called back from the kitchen, her tone deliberately calm and flat. "I'm just finishing up these plates." I focused on Leo. "Okay, Captain, time to get the ship out of dry dock," I said, my voice a forced, cheerful parody of itself. I reached for a towel. Leo didn't move. He was still staring at the door, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then his clear, little voice piped up. "Hello." My blood went cold. "No, Leo," I said too sharply. I grabbed his arm, probably too hard. He flinched and looked at me, his face crumpling in confusion. We don't talk when we hear that." "Man at door?" he asked, his lower lip trembling. "There's no man," I said, wrapping him tightly in the towel and lifting him out of the tub. My hands were shaking. As I carried him into his room, my ears straining for any sound, I noticed the damp bath mat was already starting to mildew at the corners, a dark, spreading blackness that hadn't been there an hour ago. When I came out, Clara was waiting for me in the hall, her arms crossed. Her face was pale. "He spoke to it, Mark." "I know. I was right there." "He's two, Clara. He doesn't know the rules." "He does now," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We have to make sure he understands." We tried. Over the next few days, we talked to Leo about the rule, framing it in simple terms. The knock-knock at the door is a quiet game. We told him. When we hear it, we have to be super quiet mice. No talking. He'd nod serious and say, "Quiet mouse." We thought he got it. A week later, it happened again. We were all in the living room, building a fortress of couch cushions. The knocks came. Knock, knock, knock. Clara and I froze mid-action. A cushion held between us. We looked at each other, then at Leo. He was sitting amidst the pillow pile, his favorite stuffed dog in his arms. He looked at the front door, then back at us, and put a single chubby finger to his lips. "Shoo," he whispered. "Quiet mouse." Relief flooded through me so powerfully I felt dizzy. "That's right, buddy," I whispered back. "Good job." We sat in silence for a full 5 minutes, not moving. The house was utterly still. Finally, Clara let out a long, shaky breath. "I think it's gone." We resumed our lives, but the atmosphere in the house had changed. It was like the air itself was holding its breath. Small things started going wrong with a new, malicious consistency. The central heating would kick on with a smell of burning dust and that underlying sweetness of decay. The lights in the hallway would flicker every night. At exactly 9:17 p.m., I'd find a cabinet under the kitchen sink standing open, its sticky hinge now slick with thin, clear film that smelled faintly of pond water. Then the conversation started. It was nap time. The baby monitor on our nightstand was on, hissing with soft static that sometimes coalesced into a sound like dry reeds scraping together. I was lying down reading when I heard Leo stir. "Hello." Leo's voice came through the speaker, small and clear. I smiled, expecting him to launch into a game of pretend. A different voice answered. It was low, raspy, and granular, filtered through the monitor's cheap speaker. It sounded like stones grinding together under slow, deep water. "Hello, Leo." I sat bolt upright, the book falling from my hands. My heart was a hammer in my throat. "Who you?" Leo asked, curious, not scared. "I am the man who knocks," the gravelly voice replied. There was a pause that went on too long, a silence that didn't need to breathe. "You invited me." "You at door." "Not today," the voice said, horribly patient. "Today I am closer." I was out of bed and flying down the hall before I even had a conscious thought. I threw open Leo's door. He was sitting up in his crib, looking perfectly content, clutching his stuffed dog. The room was empty. The window was closed and locked. There was no one else there. "Leo, who are you talking to?" I asked, my voice trembling. He looked at me and smiled. "The knock-knock man. He's nice." I ripped the battery pack out of the baby monitor that night. Clara, when I told her, wanted to call a priest, a psychic, someone. I convinced her it was a fluke, a cross signal. I bought a new digital monitor the next day. The conversation stopped, but other things began. Leo's drawings, once cheerful scribbles of suns and animals, changed. He started drawing tall, stick-like figures with no faces. He'd color them in with a black crayon, pressing down so hard the paper would tear. He called them his knock-knock friends. One drawing, taped to the fridge, showed a black stick figure holding the hand of a smaller, red one. The red one had a big, smiling sun where its face should be. Leo said it was him, and his new friend going for a walk. One afternoon, I found him in the backyard, standing by the fence that separated our property from the woods. He was having an animated, one-sided conversation. "Yeah, I have a dog," he was saying, holding up his stuffed toy. "His name is Woof Woof. You have a dog." I followed his gaze. There was nothing there but the dark line of trees. "Leo," I said, try and keep the panic out of my voice. "Who are you talking to?" He pointed a finger toward the empty tree line. "The man. He says he's lonely. He wants me to come play." The entity, the man who knocks, was no longer confined to the door. The rule was broken, and by breaking it, Leo had given it permission to come closer. It was in static, in his dreams, in his drawings just outside the fence. The fundamental safety of our home was gone. The final straw was a chair. Our kitchen had a small nook with a table and 2 chairs. One morning, I came down for coffee and found one of the chairs pulled out from the table. It was facing the back window. On the seat was one of Leo's drawings, a frantic, black scribble. The air around the chair was cold, and the sweet, rotten smell was so strong it made my eyes water. When I went to push the chair in, the wood of the seat was damp and soft, like rotting pulp, and came away on my fingertips in a black, fibrous residue. I knew then that it was inside, fully inside. That night, after we put Leo to bed in our room, Clara and I sat at the kitchen table, the pulled-out chair between us. We were past fear and into a numb, hollow exhaustion. "We have to leave, Mark," Clara said, her voice raw. "We can't stay here." "And go where?" I asked, staring at the empty chair. "What if it follows him?" "It's not attached to the house, Clara. It's attached to him now." We sat in silence, the truth of it hanging between us. Running wasn't the answer. We had to uninvite it. That's when I remembered the rest of what Clara's mother had said, the part we'd always dismissed. She'd said the rule worked because silence was a wall. Acknowledgement was a door. But if a door is open, it can be closed. It was a desperate, crazy gamble, but it was all we had. The next evening, after dinner, I took Leo by the hand and led him to the front door. Clara stood behind us, her hands on my shoulder for support, her knuckles white. "Leo," I said, kneeling down to his level, "we're going to play one more game with the knock-knock man. This is the last game, okay? We're going to tell him the game is over." Leo looked at me, his eyes solemn. "Okay, Daddy." I took a deep breath, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I looked directly at the front door. "You are not welcome here," I said, my voice clear and strong, belying the terror coursing through me. "The game is over. You have to go away now. We do not want to talk to you. We do not want to see you. You are not allowed here anymore." I looked down at Leo. "Your turn, buddy. Say go away." Leo looked at the door, his little face set in a determined frown. "Go away," he shouted. "No more games. Bye-bye." We stood there, holding our breath. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the temperature in the hallway dropped sharply. From the other side of the door, so quiet we almost missed it, came a sound, not a knock, but a long, slow, dragging scrape, like a root being pulled through mud. Then silence, true silence. The oppressive weight that had filled the house for weeks was just gone. Clara burst into tears of relief. I felt a giddy, disbelieving laugh bubble up in my chest. We had done it. For 3 weeks, it seemed like we were right. The knocks didn't return. The house stayed warm. Leo's drawings went back to trucks and smiling, lopsided suns. He stopped talking to an empty yard. He stopped mentioning the knock-knock man entirely. We started to breathe again. That's why it took us a few days to realize the new silence and our son was wrong. He stopped asking for his favorite foods. He stopped running to the door when I came home from work. His laughter, which used to fill the house, was gone. He would sit for hours, just staring at the wall, his stuffed dog lying forgotten beside him. His eyes, once so bright and curious, were flat and distant. It was like watching a light being slowly turned off from the inside out. Last night, I was tucking him into bed. He was so still. I leaned in to kiss his forehead, and my lips brushed against his skin. It was cold, and it was rough. I pulled back, my blood freezing in my veins. In the dim nightlight, I saw it. A patch of skin on his cheek. Just below his eye was no longer skin. It was dark, textured, and covered in a fine, bark-like pattern. It was hard and cool to the touch. And from it, and from his parted lips as he slept, came the faint, sweet, and unmistakable smell of old flowers and wet, rotting earth. We didn't just invite it in. We gave it a place to stay. We gave it a son. The man who knocks doesn't need to knock anymore. He's already here, sitting in the high chair, staring at us with our little boy's vacant eyes, waiting for the rest of him to finish turning. Story 6. My dragon in a bottle. My body heaved against my will. I doubled over and released a vile, sticky liquid that coated my mouth. I sucked in a gas of air and coughed again. The air burned in my throat as I breathed in. The sweet sting of the alcohol slicked like cough syrup, and more bitter than any medicine. Little droplets of the drink hit the floor under me, and I could only think to say one thing. "That's gross, Dad," I said as I wiped my mouth. My mom looked like she couldn't breathe because she was laughing so hard in her chair. I was only 12 years old at the time, and my dad had just given me a sip of his special bottle he kept on the top shelf of his bar. He gave me a hearty chuckle and passed me a napkin to clean up my mess. As I was standing back up, I remember him saying, "I agree. Nastiest thing I ever tasted." "What is it?" I asked, taking a big gulp of my soda before ducking under the dinner table to clean up. "It's called Fernet Branca. It was made over in Italy, though I hear they enjoy it more in Argentina, mixed with cola. You ever tried it?" I popped back up into my chair, setting the dirty napkin onto my empty plate. "Nope, and never plan to," he said, taking another tiny sip of his glass and making a sour face. "Why? Isn't it bad?" "Well, first, James," he said, wiping his mouth, "just 'cause you don't like something doesn't mean it's bad. Plenty of people love the stuff. We're just not one of them. Second," he looked over at my mom, who was gathering her composure. She gave him a small smile and began to clear our plates. "And second, James," he continued, "is my father could drink a whole bottle of this stuff, no problem. But he didn't like it any more than you or I did. No, he just liked what comes after you drink it." "What comes after?" I asked, as if Fernet were some kind of magical potion. "You get drunk, boy. It's alcohol, just like any other. It makes you feel all silly like." My brow furrowed, and he sighed gently at my confusion. He thought a lot about how he was going to phrase his next words. I sat patiently and waited for him to continue. "Being drunk is a bad thing, and don't let anyone else tell you otherwise. Now, sometimes it's okay to do bad things every once in a while, but the problem comes when the bad things become more you than the good ones." He raised his glass a little, as if to show it off. "I hate every sip of this. It's the worst drink I own, but it's also the most important. If I ever sip this and decide that it's worth drinking it to get drunk, then I've already told your mother to pour every single bottle on that shelf down the drain. You understand me, son?" At the time, I nodded to him. It was a lie. My father was the biggest man I ever met. Not in size, maybe, but in personality, attitude, and ambition. I wanted him to think I understood, that I knew how to listen. When I was 12 years old, everything he said to me was like the gold that would pave the road to my success. I'm 26 now. My father died yesterday, and I hadn't talked to him in months. I hadn't talked to anyone in my family in months. I had dozens of missed calls from both my mom and my dad. I also had a few dozen more texts, though I didn't bother to open them. I just pulled down on the notification bar to read it without opening it. Texts like, "Your father doesn't long left. He wants to talk to you," and "Please come home for my mom." My father's texts were less frequent, but every one of them felt like a dagger in my heart. "Your mother needs you. I hope you're okay. And I love you." She never said what he died from, and I never reached out to ask. One text from my dad stuck out to me more than the others. "The last time we talked was when I got my new apartment. I asked him to help me cover rent. I told him I had a promising job I had just gotten, one that would allow me to get my GED in my free time. I told him I would keep better contact with him and Mom. I told him I was getting sober. I lied about all of it. He gave me the money on one condition, that I give him my new address. He even promised he would never drive over unannounced. He said it just made him feel safer knowing. The text read, "I'm having your mom send something to you. It's important." And sure enough, I heard a knock on my apartment door this morning. It was a package sent from my old home address. Before I even opened it, I already knew it would be a bottle of Rene Branca. I placed it on the floor as gently as I could with shaking hands, tossing the box aside. It rattled amongst the empty blue vodka bottles and knocked over a tower of beer cans I had built yesterday. I didn't have any alcohol left in the house. I didn't usually have leftovers anyway, but I did a thorough sweep just in case. When I got the text that my dad had finally passed yesterday, I made a promise to myself. 1 week without drinking. If I could make it 1 week, then I would reward myself by seeing my family again. I sat on the floor across from that bottle for a long time. I stared at it, mesmerized by every little detail. The dark green glass, the liquid black as tar inside, and the faux weather paper print of the label. My father's words rattled in my head. He said my grandfather could drink a bottle of the stuff easy if it meant getting drunk. At the time, I hadn't truly understood why someone would consume something so nasty so that they could feel silly. Now it took every ounce of my being not to open it and chug the bottle, and even then, every ounce might not be enough. I couldn't understand why my father would send me this. He knew damn well that I was an alcoholic, and yet he thought it was a great idea to send me a fresh, unopened bottle of liquor. I closed my eyes, tried to ignore the dull pain behind them, and thought back on the first time I tried it. I remembered the Fernay's sticky texture and how it coated my mouth. The bittersweet flavor, similar to a foul-tasting cough syrup. It burned my throat as I breathed long after I spat it out. That burn was something I'd come to appreciate so much now, one I could imagine so well and familiar. I could almost feel it. Almost. My imagination couldn't come close to the real thing, the thing sitting right in front of me. I opened my eyes, my vision still on the bottle. It was as if even with my eyes closed, they could still sense its location. My eyes narrowed, pupils closing in on the seam between the cap and the ring underneath it. The thin connection points had severed, and the lingering taste of Renee rang on my tongue. The bottle did not look as full as a fresh, store-bought bottle. Had I sipped it? I didn't remember drinking it, and my hands still danced shakily atop my thighs as I sat with my legs crossed. Surely I hadn't, right? I would have drank more than a tiny sip, and my hands would be shaking less. But the bottle was open, and just a touch less than a full one would be. Or was I imagining it? I needed to hold it. I picked the bottle up, feeling its heft in my hands. Its weight felt heavier than any normal bottle, especially one that wasn't full. I brought it closer to my face, to let my eyes close in on the fill line and judge it. But the smell, the medicinal, herbal smell, it clocked me in the jaw like a punch, and I had to slam the bottle on the floor away from my face. My hand didn't leave the bottle. It lingered as if the bottle was a supple hip, as if I was going to pull it close and embrace it. I gave the bottle a gentle squeeze. The glass did not yield. I could imagine the taste of the liquor on my tongue like honey, but that was all it was, my imagination. The bottle would not best me, but I had to at least check if I was right. If it was open, my hand slowly, sensually slid up the neck of the bottle. My other hand supported it at the base. I grabbed the cap of the bottle and gave it a slow turn. The cap turned smoothly, with no audible crack of a seal. The bottle was open, but that didn't answer my burning question. Did my father send me an open bottle, or had I opened it myself, my addled mind unable to recollect? I promised myself I would make it 1 week without drinking. I wanted to see my family. I needed to see them. But as I was just a disappointment to them, an embarrassment. I was sure of it. If I had taken a sip of the bottle, then that week would start tomorrow as opposed to today, or would have been from tomorrow anyway. I went to bed drunk last night. I told myself it was a sort of last hurrah for my dad. It was just an excuse to drink. I woke up sober, or at least more sober than I wanted to. But if I was drunk past midnight, then that means I was drunk on today's date. If I was drunk on today's date, then doesn't that really mean that my week of sobriety starts tomorrow anyway? The bottle was open. The bottle was in my hands. The bottle was on the floor between my legs. At least I thought it was between my legs. Instead, I found myself drinking its nectar, the neck of the bottle pressed to my lips, hands pressed against the back of my head, pressuring me to suckle the teat of the bottle. I supped the honey and felt it flow through my body like the ichor of the divine. I drank and I drank, feeling a dribble flow down the side of my cheek. I slammed the bottle down onto my fake wooden floors. The noise echoed through my tiny studio apartment. I didn't stop because I wanted to. I stopped because I thought I heard something. Someone speaking to me from seemingly nowhere. You get drunk, boy. It's alcohol, just like any other. I heard. He wasn't here, my father. I knew he wasn't. But that didn't make me hear it any less. I picked up the cap of the bottle, inspecting it thoroughly. The soft ridges at its base, the smooth texture of its top. I placed it on top of the bottle and screwed it back on, slowly. As I screwed, I could feel the liquid in the bottle slosh invitingly. Like a metronome, the liquid in the bottle moved back and forth. It captured me, invited me, danced for me. But I couldn't drink. I needed to see my mother. I needed to help her, to be there for her. How could I do that drunk? So with great effort, I released my grip on the bottle of Fernet Branca. It was about a third of the way gone. Instead, I decided I would dip into my secret stash, a plastic bottle that used to hold water. I repurposed to hold vodka instead, tucked under the sink in my bathroom, behind my toothbrush. I crawled to it, to my bathroom, as if I was incapable of standing. I was capable, I just didn't want to. That's what I told myself. The water bottle held 16.9 ounces, about 500 milliliters of pure bliss, about 500 milliliters of my personal medicine. I drank the whole thing in one go, my hand at the base of the bottle, and gently pressing it closer and closer to my mouth. I felt the liquid burn through my body like acid, felt its tender caress as it tried to kill me. I coughed and I sputtered, my breath feeling so hot it was like I breathed fire. I flopped onto my back, my head against the tub and my feet past the door. The warmth of the vodka spread lower and lower, past my hips and thighs and into the very tips of my toes. It grabbed me by the ankles and held firm its grip. My body was dragged away with a jolt, my head smacking against the tiles. My body slid across the floor, my arms reaching out in a panic to grab anything they could hold on to. All they managed to touch was the empty plastic bottle, still lingering with the scent of venom. I tried to yell out in fear, but my voice was caught by a gnarled hand. It clawed its way up and out of my chest, fingers emerging from the back of my throat, reaching past my teeth. It latched onto my cheeks and violently wrenched itself out of me. It thudded on the floor beside my head, my jaw locked open with its yellowed forearm. It dug its bloodied nails into my floor and twisted my body around. It was rotating me. It made me face the bottle. The scent of bile coated the room in a thick layer of fast food French fries and iron. I think I was dying. Still, the liquid in the bottle moved. Still, it danced for me. I reached out to it, missing by a few inches on my first attempt. But the bottle didn't care. It nudged itself over to meet me. It nuzzled my palm, filling it as I felt its slender curve. I slid my hand up the bottle and pinched the cap between my finger and thumb softly. My mouth was coated in a film of mucus and stomach acid. What I needed was honey. Then the neck of the bottle was back to my lips. The cap was off, the bottle raised up, and I don't remember doing it. All I could think of in the moment was the syrup, my medicine, my special bottle. My eyes were closed again, and all I could hear was a roar. It came from the bottle, the roar. It rumbled deep and low, shaking the lonely window on my wall. I didn't stop drinking. The roar grew louder, the noise seeping between the seam my mouth formed around the drink. I felt the Fernet on my tongue, rolling it around as if to savor a fine wine, but only savoring for the faintest moment, before the next gulp came. It was as if every swallow erased a memory of the flavor from my mind, and I had to remind myself all over again. The noise grew louder, the bottle bellowing into my face. I lowered it, gasping in an attempt for air. The bottle was just under halfway full now, or maybe halfway empty. With it finally away from my face, I looked down to see an eye peeking back up at me, just as fast as I had seen it. The eye rolled backwards to reveal a veiny, bloodshot white before being encased in a jet black sludge. It rose in the neck of the bottle, sloshing and frothy like the ocean, but black as tar and twice as sticky. It latched onto my face and dragged me back down, back to the bottle. It coated my nose, my eyes, my mouth, all of me. I hadn't gotten enough air. I couldn't breathe. It raised the bottle up, tilting the base above the neck and forcing it down my throat. I gagged, the jagged hand in my gut rising to meet the tar, interlocking and filling my airway. I was sure of it now. I was dying. I was killing myself. But the bottle did not leave my lips. James, I hope you don't have to read this for many, many years. I love you, son, and I'm proud of you. Your mother feels the same way. And no matter what you do, we will always love you. Never, ever feel like you aren't worthy of being helped. Never tell yourself that you don't deserve to be happy. And never feel like your happiness needs to come from the bottom of a bottle. I hope when you read this, you're in a better place. I hope with all my heart that you may never read this at all. But if you're reading this, and my death still lingers on your mind, I need you to do something for me, James. One last favor for your father. Call your mother, as long as you're able to ask for help. It is never too late to receive it. I love you, James. Goodbye. After I read the letter, I dragged my eyes to the top and read it again. Then once more after that, I read the paper over and over until there were too many tears in my eyes to find meaning in the letters. I squeezed it in my hands, ripping it by accident. Every muscle in my body tensed uncontrollably as I heaved and sobbed on my floor. Somehow, I managed to find my phone, crawling on my hands and knees until I did. I opened it, and for the first time in far, far too long, I called my mother. It was late at night, too late for her to be up, but she only let it ring once before she answered me. "James?" she said in a hushed tone. Her breathing sounded rapid and tense, as if my call caused her to hyperventilate. I tried to explain to her what was going on. The bottle, the dragon, the hands, all of it, but I doubt I managed to speak any real words in my jumbled ramble. I collapsed on the floor, coughing and hacking. My fingers, yellowed and thin, held onto the phone like it was the only thing left tethering me to this earth. She stayed on the phone and listened to me, not saying a word, but her warm presence spread out phone and into my body. Eventually, after maybe 10 minutes, I heard a knock on my door. It was the police, come to get me the help I needed. My apartment was a 6-hour drive from my parents' house, and later on, my mother would tell me that the only words she could understand from me were, "I'm sorry" and "help me." I repeated, "help me" a lot, almost nonstop. She thought she was listening to me die, and by the hospital's reports, it wasn't far from the truth. My apartment was also a mess. Vomit, empty bottles, and broken glass were everywhere. Old takeout bags and empty beer cans served as a moat around my pile of laundry I used as a chair to watch TV. I had cuts and bruises on my body, and I was dehydrated to all hell. I'm in a better place now, much better. I'm writing this from rehab, on a new laptop my mom brought me. Tomorrow is my 27th birthday, and she stopped by to give me a laptop as an early gift. We're getting through this together. She blamed herself for what happened to me, for not knowing how bad I had gotten. I, of course, told her it's all my fault. She just smiled and said she was glad I had listened to my father when it mattered most. She was glad to have her son back. We aren't usually allowed to have laptops and phones in rehab, but they made an exception for me. They want me to tell my story, to spread it in the hopes that it can reach someone who needs it, someone who feels alone, trapped in a tower with their own dragon in a bottle. I don't know if you're that person, reading this, needing help, but if you are, then I hope you find what you need to slay your dragon. I'm rooting for you. Like my father said, as long as you are able to ask for help, it is never too late to receive it. Story 7. Whitetail. It was that time of year again. Meeting up with Matt and Ollie in our local bar, we got to organizing our next trip, like an annual holiday. Each fall we find a new national park to camp out in over the weekend. As the roto went, that year was my decision. Having already planned out our whole excursion, being the prepared person I was, our destination was set. We'd be charting a portion of the Appalachian Trail, already researching some of the local mythos. I had my spooky campfire story and harmless prank locked in, ready to get Matt back for scaring the shit out of me the previous year. That was just it. Spend some time with your mates, enjoy the natural beauty of our country, and scare each other with some made-up campfire story. It had worked that way for the last 5 years. Why would that time be any different? Finishing up our breakfast, we saddled up my aging Corolla and embarked. Ollie's tunes were impeccable as always, as we jammed out to some peak 2010's white girl bops. A couple of hours in, as if the realization hit Matt like a truck, he flung himself backwards in my passenger seat and swore. Fuck, I forgot my damn pillow. Fucking AHHHH. Laughing for a second, that triggered me into silently itemizing my own list. Crap, I think I left my toiletries bag on the sink. I remembered packing the bag, but evidently it didn't make its way on our trip. Ollie, loving our collective pain, couldn't stop laughing, especially as he was the most forgetful out of all three of us. However, his sniggers quickly fell as Matt spat out a retort. Yeah, dickhead, at least I don't get my mom to pack my bag at 24. Interspersed with the occasional snack and toilet break, as Ollie had a bladder the size of a pea. We eventually made it to the gravel parking area. The unusually low number of other vehicles almost got me worrying that the trail had been closed. Fortunately, a family of 5 pulled up behind us and unpacked with the rapid efficiency of seasoned campers. Seeing them funnel through the wooden gate in the time it took me to stretch and open my trunk, those worries subsided. It had rained the day prior, though as it was on the way over, the midday sun peeked from behind the calm clouds, signaling a fair weather hike. Still as pumped as we were that morning, I whipped out the map as the boys followed me onto the trail. The hike was as perfect as we'd expected. Shade from the enormous pines shielded us from the ever-radiant light cascading through the canopy, as we marched on to the tune of Ollie's constant chatter. Though he wasn't one to keep quiet, the ambient whistles of unseen birds and soft breeze quickly drowned out whatever it was he was yapping about. Breaking from the trees for a short section, Matt pointed out a small group of deer trotting from across the plains on a lower plateau. Far too busy to even acknowledge us for the most part, they scurried on to another section of tree line, tailed by one seemingly older member. Though we were easily around 70 meters away, it stopped and gazed over. For an uncomfortable moment, the older deer seemed to stare straight through me, those miniature white pinpricks in its otherwise black eyes almost singling me out. Before I could even comprehend the situation fully, it turned and fell in line with the others. Ollie, without even finishing his current ramble, chirped up. It can probably smell you from here. Ah ha ha ha, sarcastically laughing. I made my way back to the head of the group as we pressed on. Though the scenery was beautiful, something felt wrong about being there. Apart from that family earlier on, we'd not seen another soul for a good couple of hours by that point. Pushing those thoughts out of my mind, at least we'd not have to worry about keeping the noise down. Yes, there were designated sites, but as always, we preferred the privacy to really enjoy our time. Diverting from the main trail, we made it to a small clearing which would be our spot for that night. I'd been clued into this area by a long-distance friend who'd traveled the trail a couple of years back. He'd given it a glowing review and urged me to pitch up here, which I'm glad we did. Thick groves encircled the around 11/11M clearing, which fit our 3 tents and campfire perfectly. Remnants of campers gone stained the shallow pit in its center where a small pile of firewood laid. Digging out and setting up our gear, we were settled for the first night, leaving Matt to start on the sausages. Me and Ollie scouted out our vicinity. We were supposed to be collecting firewood, but with a small reserve already at camp, what we really wanted was to find a creek. Damien had also informed me that there was a slow-flowing creek and small waterfall nearby, though had given us fair warning that it was frequented by a range of animals, which he emphasized. breaking from the tree-line. We emerged to a picturesque view, exactly as he'd said. Though the day was drawing to a close, that creek was serene. Its soft babbling mixing with the now chirping nocturnal insects brought a calming wave over the both of us. In awe, neither of us had noticed a lone stag at the crest of the fall, bowing us to drink from a flowing stream. It too hadn't clocked our presence. A snap diverted all three of us to the other side of the creek, deeper betwixt the dense wood ahead. Scurrying away into the underbrush, Ollie tapped my shoulder and beckoned for us to join the deer and return to the camp, though I strained my eyes to get a better picture of whatever had startled the stag. Though neither of us saw anything from across the way, the majesty that our surroundings had captivated all but fell away. In its place, that primal fear, born whatever now coughed out a raspy croak from the shadowed tree-line. Turning and scampering back to camp, the safety that cindering lifeline brought calmed us. No natural creature willingly wanders close to those flickering flames, and with the drinks flowing, those fears have been relegated to the backs of our minds. That being said, I couldn't shake that ingrained feeling of being watched. Those two caught on quick and gave me a fair amount of shit for being scared at my own location. Mate, you're supposed to be scaring us. How have you wet yourself already? Laughing in tandem, they were right. Downing the rest of my drink and mustering up all the courage I've been lacking so far, I fueled up a fire and got to telling my campfire story. From what I can recall, it was something to do with creatures that could perfectly mimic animals. Matt wasn't buying it at first, calling my story a crappy copy of his Wendigo-based tale from our last trip. The basic gist was that they couldn't speak and instead made a choking, coughing sound as they attempted to mimic the voices of people. With that and their uncanny appearance, they'd scare off people attempting to stay overnight. My plan was to use the deer mask I brought to jump them on the second night, but a couple of minutes into telling my poorly crafted story, a rustling came from the bushes behind Matt's tent. Quit rightly freaked out. We all aimed out torches at the area, only to see a stag slowly emerge from the foliage. The animal looked to be in a trance-like state, not even glancing at us or seeming bothered. Its antlers were snagging on the drooping branches as it entered and exited our camp, simply walking in from one side of Matt's tent to the other. We were all stunned to silence. Taking that as a good enough sign to stop drinking and just call it night, we peeled on whatever timber we had remaining, in the hopes it would keep whatever else was out there at bay. I knew full well that wild animals don't like people, especially animals as skittish as deer, but that one looked wrong. I remembered something about chronic wasting, even bringing up to the boys in the morning, but still, its hollow white eyes were burned into my head for the rest of the following Saturday. Ollie looked restless that morning, saying something about one of us needing to take our inhaler with all that croaking we were doing the past night, but we brushed it off as him trying to keep up my bit. None of us really wanted to talk about it, other than my suggestion, leaving that experience in the clearing as we eat breakfast and departed. Pretty quickly we were back to it, mesmerized by the quiet serenity of the trail and cracking jokes. Though the path seemed to narrow and we got caught up in the occasional lower branch, it was smooth sailing. Around halfway into our day, at a conveniently placed bench, carved out of fallen log, a dog walker strolled by. Honestly, it startled us a little, having not seen anyone since we entered. The man smiled as we stroked his black and white pointer, departing with little more than a hi. Finishing up our food, we returned to the slightly steeper portion of our remaining hike. Once we broke from the heavy canopy of the woodland we'd been trekking through, all the chirps, squeaks, and croaks faded. Before we knew it, all that we could hear was the chilling howl of the cooling day. Out there, exposed in that portion of grassland, that feeling returned, though we could easily see over vastly greater distances in all directions. Some part of my mind screamed out that with the next swivel of my head, I'd be locked in another staring match with something unnatural. Finally, cresting the ridge we'd been following, our eyes collectively met the trail's snaking path into a deeper section of woodland. Fixed to our position, a single stag stood at the entryway, head down in the dirt. Though for a couple of seconds it seemed perfectly normal, the longer we looked, the more its movements seemed off. The closest thing I can compare it to is the motion of chewing, though more human, with its lower jaw moving up and down. The animal's mouth also seemed off. Instead of the thin muscle characteristic of most deer, Its mouth was more squared and shorter, opening at an angle far too wide. The thing that unnerved us the most and caused us to take a few steps back was the fact it wasn't eating anything. Those false movements only seemed to mimic actual chewing. In the instant it saw us, it darted back into the undergrowth out of sight. I didn't want to take another step, ready to turn tail and huff it back to the car, even through the night if we had to. That's not a deer. Ollie's voice shook, dislodging the carefree attitude he'd carried throughout the trip. Matt wasn't having it though. So what? It's some deformed deer. Yeah, it looks fucked up, but I got my Ruger, so we're good. Flashing his hip elicited a tired sigh from Ollie. There spat from back when we were planning this trip, rearing its head after Matt flat out refused to leave his holster home due to potential dangers. Ollie was a very strong advocate, but regardless, I think even he was a little reassured after seeing that animal. Breaking their circling argument, I put the rest of our hike to a vote. As expected, Ollie agreed with me, though Matt wouldn't budge. We're over halfway back now, plus we've got to sleep here one more night regardless. I don't care if you two want to go back. I'll be seeing you at the car. Though we didn't like it, Matt was right, and he had the gun. Conceding, we pushed through those final couple of hours. The rest of that day and even into the evening, I could tell it was getting to them. No matter how much Matt tried to hide it behind a stoic expression, and Ollie behind his constant yammer. Though we had a lot more cans still, no one seemed overly eager to drink, especially with the woods having eyes now. That feeling only grew the deeper into the night we stayed, with our roaring campfire keeping the monsters at bay, calling it a night way earlier than we ever had. The fire was fueled as we all zipped up for what was going to be a long night. I can't remember if I was actually asleep or just in the throes of consciousness, but Ollie's scream jolted me to life like a taser, grabbing my multi-tool and flicking the zip down at a breakneck pace. I was met with the glacial chill of a pitch-black night, straining to focus until Matt's torch blinded us both. Ollie was petrified midway through his apparent unzipping. Though I didn't see what he had, I recall the sound of cantering hooves, just as his scream reanimated me. Though it didn't click until he painted the picture. According to Ollie, he'd woken up as nature called on his infinitesimally small bladder. Stretching, he saw the faint embers of our fire cast a hunched silhouette across his nylon wall, rocking over onto his knees to unzip his tent. He spoke, questioning whether we needed more timber as he assumed the person was one of us. Mere moment before the flap opened, exposing him to the truth. A gargle hoarse voice groaned out in an almost anthropomorphic tone. Not deer. Peeking at whatever that creature was caused Ollie's death rattle. Honestly, I'd never heard him scream that loud before in my life, and I don't think I will again. His best description in that state was that of a stag, crouched down in the posture a person would if they were stoking the fire. The moment their eyes met, it scowled baring its straight, slim teeth before lurching up and galloping into the undergrowth, like a human on all fours. The thing that freaked him out, aside from the broken regurgitated sound of his voice, were the milky white eyes of the creature we'd been seeing all weekend. Nobody got any more sleep for the rest of that night, singularly focused on keeping that fire going until daybreak. I know Matt wouldn't admit it, but even he was shitting bricks too. For once Ollie was silent. Though I never found his jokes funny, one or two would have really lightened the mood. Early in our groggy, tired attempt to pick up a decent pace, rapid footsteps startled us into grasping our weapons of choice. Gliding up the path ahead came the dog, Walker, we'd seen the day prior. He looked like he'd been running all night as he questioned if we'd seen his dog. Having other things on our mind, we sorrowfully apologized that we'd not. Crossing paths the last time. Maybe we should have backtracked and helped him, but we wanted out ASAP. I considered telling him to be careful, but in his heightened state of panic, I doubt he'd have registered anything other than his dog's location. On our final descent of the trail, our once picturesque surroundings had morphed into the setting of a bad horror movie. Gone were the cheerful ambient sounds of critters, instead replaced by the filtering call of that ratcheting gale. Still pressing on, we happened upon a camp, though no one rose to greet us. A handful of tents and a now deceased fire littered the cleared patch of woodland they called home. Thinking back to that family, I prayed they were just out for a morning walk, though with the scattering of supplies, My mind wandered, stopping for a moment to catch our breath, refuel on our leftover rations, and add another layer. I sputtered out a wheezing cough. Though we hadn't been running, my restless body and the intense pace we attempted to maintain had taken its toll on me. Ollie almost flew out of his newly adorned coat at the sounds I croaked out, spinning to face me, that look in his eyes only filling me with another wave of dread, though soon after they stared past me. I had thought it was only my loud cough, mirroring that creature's raspy tones, but the advent of something soft and wet on my lowered right hand had my heart beating out of my chest. Spinning to face the adjacent threat, I was met with the panting, dirty image of a dog. Though I couldn't fully make out its coat's coloration, it strongly resembled the pointer that Walker had passed us with on the second day, caught in a moral dilemma. None of us wanted to retread the trail back in hopes of finding its owner, but at the same time, we couldn't just leave it here with what we'd seen. Pulling a section of cord from my bag and tying it around the dog's collar, we opted to just return to the car park and call a ranger. With the dog in tow, we resumed our eager pace. Oh, he pulled a lot. Any rustle, small snap of a twig, or even some faint sound we couldn't fully make out. He was yanking toward the shrubbery. Was it really a good idea to take him along? I knew Matt didn't mean it. That bite mark from when we were kids, messing around in his neighbor's yard, resulting in preconceived notions even 12 years later. We knew they were probably just some small animals making their way through the underbrush, but every shake of foliage could have hidden that stag. Yanking harder and pulling me almost headfirst into one pine, our new companion didn't make it easy to keep moving, especially when we hit a steeper than normal decline. The path did split, visibly circling round the gorge, at least by my map's account. The only downside was that there were no trail marking for that portion, with our estimates putting the tour at an extra 30 to 40 minutes. We opted for the more dangerous path. Reckless as it was, we desperately just wanted out, though our fears came true. Slipping on an uneven outcrop, with the force that dog pulled, I had a spur-of-the-moment decision to make. Let go of the lead and take the brunt of fall, or release the cord and hope my arms could shield the impact. I chose the latter, leaving the dog to bound down. Practically unharmed, I attempted to use my now free arms to anchor myself on the first topple. Unfortunately, with a heavy pack, I was simply praying for unbroken bones. I don't even remember how many times I barreled down, or for how long. Waking in a heap at the base of the gorge, the whole right side of my body was numb. My brain screamed out that I was in pain, but my nervous system lagged, though only for a moment. Rolling over and attempting to claw myself up to my knees, a wave of excruciating pain radiated from my right wrist and knee, flooded my body and bringing me to tears. Flopping back to the floor like the wounded animal I was, Matt and Ollie quickly approached. I don't remember what they said, or even what they were doing, simply forcing myself to grit the pain and refrain from looking at the epicenter of my torment. In hindsight at the hospital, it was clear I'd fractured my patella and broken a portion of my lower femur. Other than a sprained wrist and ankle, the scrapes were the least of my worries. Laying there, staring up in a trance at the swaying treetops, they must have given me something to dull the pain, because as quickly as my mind had focused on my injuries, it flicked to the barking, echoing out from my right. As they attempted to sterilize any open wounds and bandage me up, my gaze fell on the dense foliage that now shook in contrasting intervals to the gust cutting no us. Wrenching me up and flinging my arm over his shoulder mat crutched me away, whilst Ollie picked up the slack. The ghostly white faces and wide expressions they wore indicating that they'd noticed it too. In our panic, the dog had either fled or chased down whatever was rustling in those woods. Regardless, and as morbid as it sounds, we couldn't have kept tabs on with our current situation, with my crippled knee. Our pace dropped to a crawl, and with the evening drawing on us faster than anticipated, we all prepared to trek through the night. As if on cue, the moment the day died, those coughs arose, serenading us from every conceivable angle. Those rustles drew closer, though what caused them never exposed its form. Whatever was out there, maybe only a meter from us in any given direction, it could have attacked us. I mean, we were sitting ducks, but it didn't. As the cacophony grew louder and the impending fear of attack rose like a predator about to pounce, our salvation shone through the grove ahead. Breaking from a tree lean, That gravel path seemed to glisten like gold in the slowly emerging moonlight. Spinning to finally lay eyes on whatever had pursued us for the last 3 days, the forest fell silent. No rustling, no sounds, not even the shrill chill of the wind lingered. Maybe it was the suddenness of those sounds dissipating, or the complete lack of energy we had after dragging ourselves back to the car, but the silence was almost worse. Some deeply primal part of my brain reminded me that out there between the thick groves of oaks and narrowing branches of maples, there were things that scratched that prey sense we carried back when the wilds were far more dangerous, pushing those guilty feelings of trespassing out of our mind and spinning gravel. We departed for the hospital. I don't know why I even considered looking back, as if meet eyes with whatever was observing our exit would rationalize that weekend. Fortunately, my eyes stayed fixed to the road, just like the others. No amount of curiosity was worth the trauma Ollie replayed. It's coming up on our date soon. Ollie's turn to pick our location. He's been really shaken up. Not even wanting to go hunting when I finally got the full range of motion my leg back, though I get with all the whitetails in our neck of the woods. Maybe we'll miss this year, though I know that will piss Matt off. It's probably for the best. That's just it. Life goes on, and we slowly drown in the security of our daily life. If we ever end up giving it another go, we should really stay on the beaten path. Damien did say, all manner of animals frequent those secluded trails. Story 8. What happened to Lori? I am 34 now, but this all happened when I was in first grade, back in April 16th, 1999. I remember that date clearly, as it scarred me for life. This event still weighs on my mind to this day, and I fear it is happening again. On August of 1997, that's when I first met my best friend, Lori. We were in Mrs. York's kindergarten class, and we just clicked. We loved making up stories, drawing our characters, and making them going on adventures. I'm sure if we discovered D&D at that time, we would be hooked. After the first day, we discovered we were just a few houses away, and that's when we began to spend our afternoons in each other's yards, playing, doing whatever 5-year-olds do. Lori had an older brother. Can't remember his name, but I vaguely remember he was 2 years older than my older sister, Becca, who was 10, so that would make him 12. They both would always joke that Lori and I would make a cute couple. I see her boyfriend is here. Lori's brother would tease when I show up. Nick, your girlfriend is here. Becca would call out to me when Lori comes to my house. We usually try to fight them as we tell them we are friends. Even my uncle, Oscar, would join in on the teasing. By the time we reached first grade, we ended up going in separate classes. Lori was in Mrs. Johnson's class while I was in Miss Whitaker's. But we still hung around at recess, playing and talking about what we each did in class. When school let out, Lori's brother and Becca would pick us up and walk us home. Lori's brother and Becca wouldn't talk as much. Honestly, I never noticed as Lori and I talked about our day as if we haven't seen each other in years. Now, the horrid date. Friday, April 16th. I remember seeing Lori in a pink dress, a black bow holding back her dark brown hair, and she looked annoyed when I walked up to her house, so we could walk to school together. Is it picture day? I asked, looking down at my plain clothes. Gotta go to a... Can't remember what family event she was going. After school. Instead of changing after school, Mom thought I should wear my dress. It's dumb, she grumbled. We swung on the swings before school started, talking about our plans for the weekend, and I remember feeling sad as she would be gone all weekend, but was excited to hear about her weekend at this family event, which she promised to tell me. The bell rang and we went to our classes. Fast forward to recess, and we sat on the swings. As Lori promised her mom she wouldn't ruin her dress when a classmate asked us if we want to play tag. Lori and I figured it would be an okay game to play, so we agreed. We were playing for a while, and I was zooming around the playground, avoiding the boy who was not paying attention before me, until I hit my head hard on the bridge that connected the two play areas of the playground. I remember falling back, my vision blurring. Nick, I heard Lori ask me. I'm okay. I said, sitting up but suddenly feeling dizzy. Then the bell rang. Recess was over. Should I take you to the nurse? Lori asked me. No, I'll be okay, I told her, walking toward my class. I remember the worried look on Lori's face, but she reluctantly joined her class. I remember I fell off the rest of the day, my head throbbing, my vision blurring a bit, and just generally confused. I didn't wait for Lori after school as her parents were picking her up, so I walked alone with Becca, still feeling off. I didn't tell anyone about my head injury, as I thought it wasn't that bad, but I felt so tired. When I got home, I decided to take a nap on the couch, to sleep the strangeness off. When I awoke from my nap, it was already dark, but I knew I felt a lot better. Look who's up from the dead, I heard someone say. I spotted a girl who I'd never seen before, yet I knew her. I just looked at her confused. Oh, good. You're awake. Want something to eat? Mom asked me, poking her head from the kitchen, but I just couldn't take my eyes off this familiar stranger. What? The girl snapped, then rolled her eyes and left towards the kitchen. I cautiously approached my mom in the kitchen when I spotted both Becca and the girl doing homework. Maybe it was Becca's friend, but I remember her friends, maybe a new girl Becca befriended. But why does my gut tell me it's not true? Mom made me a sandwich, which I took and hurried to the living room, trying to process it all. As I ate, I looked up at my TV, and above them was the family portrait. My parents, Becca, me, my younger brother Ryan, and the girl from the kitchen. That was Penny, my eldest sister. But I knew that was impossible. I knew for a fact I never had an older sister named Penny. It was only Becca. But I knew that was true somehow. That's my eldest sister. How could I forget? I knew I needed to talk to Lori about this, because it felt so strange. Maybe she remembers her too? Did I hit my head hard enough that I forgot Penny? I was cautious around Penny, still unsure if I could trust her, even though she was my sister. By Monday, rushed to Lori's house, eager to give her my news, but she wasn't at our waiting spot. I waited a bit longer, but I knew I was going to be late if I waited. I felt bad going to school without her, but I couldn't be late myself. Reluctantly, I ran to school alone. By recess, I asked one of Lori's friends about Lori, thinking she might have heard from her. Lori who? She asked me. Lori. I trailed off, because at that moment I forgot her last name. I always remembered her full name, but my mind only could think of the name Lori. She's in your class. You two made a volcano together, I said. Her friend only arched an eyebrow. You mean Talia? I knew something was wrong. Talia was Lori's bully, and this friend avoided Talia too. We got into an argument to the point a teacher had to break us apart. I was taken to the principal's office. First time I ever went, and that's when I noticed the other thing. My school name. It wasn't Washington Elementary anymore, but Lincoln Elementary. At first, I thought I was at the wrong school. Maybe that's why I didn't see Lori. But I knew that wasn't true. I just withdrew within myself, unsure what was true anymore. First, I found out I have a sister named Penny. Then I discovered Lori never existed, and now the school name changed? I couldn't figure out how to tell the principal about this, as it sounded crazy, so I just said I was confused. I just didn't know what to do. Years passed, and I just went on with my life, wondering what happened. When I heard about glitches in the Matrix, I thought, is that what happened to me? When I hit my head, I went into another universe where Lori never existed, but Penny did. Now, years later, I feel like it's happening again because I sent Penny a birthday text for her eldest daughter, Vanessa. Nick, I don't have a daughter named Vanessa. Story 9. The man upstairs was never there. I moved into that apartment in the summer of 2003. It was a quiet building on the edge of town. 6 units, a cracked parking lot, and a small patch of grass out front that the landlord swore he'd turn into a garden someday. The rent was cheap, and I just got my first steady job at a hardware store. So I didn't care that the walls were thin or that the ceiling creaked when someone walked above me. It was mine. My first place alone. The first week, I barely noticed a man upstairs. Sometimes I'd hear the faint thump of footsteps around midnight, or the sound of a TV playing static too loud. I figured he worked late. Everyone in the building seemed quiet, the kind of small-town people who don't ask questions. Then, around the third week, I started waking up at 3 a.m. sharp, every night. It wasn't a nightmare that woke me, or any loud noise. It was a silence, that strange, heavy kind of silence that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. Then I'd hear it, a slow, dragging sound from the ceiling, like someone moving furniture an inch at a time. At first, I tried to ignore it. I'd turn over, tell myself the guy was just rearranging his place. But after a few nights, it got weird. The sound didn't move normally. It would stop right above my bed, stay still for minutes, then shift to the corner of the room. Once I heard something like humming, not a song. More like someone whispering to themselves without words. When I told my landlord, he shrugged. "Oh, that's probably Mr. Clark," he said. "He's been there for years. Retired fella. Keeps to himself." So I left it at that. But a few days later, I ran into the lady from 2B while checking my mail. She was in her 60s, always wearing pink slippers. I asked her if she knew Mr. Clark. She frowned. "Sweetheart, nobody's lived in 3A since last winter. That apartment's empty." I laughed awkwardly, thinking she must be mistaken. But that night, when I looked up toward a window above mine, there was a faint light on, flickering blue like a TV. I told myself maybe she just didn't notice someone moved in. The landlord wasn't exactly the type to update tenants about anything. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about it. So one evening, I waited until I heard the footsteps. Then I went outside and looked up. The window was dark, no TV light, but I could still hear the slow creaking of floorboards. That's when I noticed something else. The sound wasn't above me anymore. It was inside my apartment. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, long enough for me to freeze in place, too afraid to breathe. Then it was gone. After that, things started changing subtly. My clock radio would reset to 3 o'clock every night. My bathroom mirror fogged up even when the shower hadn't run. And sometimes, when I walked into my bedroom, it smelled faintly of old cigarettes, the kind my grandfather used to smoke. I started leaving the TV on for background noise. It helped for a while. Then one night, I woke up and the TV had turned itself off. Static hissed on the screen for a moment, and then, faintly, I heard it again, that low, wordless humming. I called the landlord the next morning. He said he'd check the apartment upstairs. But 2 days later, he called back and told me the door was still locked and covered in dust. Nobody had been inside. I almost moved out then. But I was stubborn broke and tired of running from weird feelings. So I decided to prove to myself that there was a normal explanation. I borrowed a cheap tape recorder from the hardware store and left it on my nightstand before I went to bed. At 3 a.m., I woke up by clockwork. No sound, no movement, just that oppressive stillness. The next morning, I played the tape. Nothing for the first few minutes. Then, faintly I heard it, humming, and underneath it, something that made my stomach drop. My own voice, whispering words I couldn't make out. I threw the recorder away. Weeks passed. I stopped sleeping much. My co-workers noticed I was off. Pale, jumpy, distracted. I told them I had insomnia. Then one night, I came home from a late shift and saw the light on upstairs again. I couldn't help it. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed the back stairs to 3A. The door was unlocked. Inside, everything was coated in dust. A few pieces of furniture draped in yellowed sheets. The air smelled stale like mothballs and old wood. I was about to leave when I saw something carved into the wall near the window. Deep scratches forming words. My flashlight flickered, and then, clear as day, I heard footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate. I turned around, but no one was there, just the sound of breathing that wasn't mine. I bolted down the stairs and didn't stop running until I was back in my car. I slept at a motel that night. When I returned the next day, the landlord was standing outside. He looked uneasy. "Saw your car gone all night," he said. "Listen, If you're hearing things maybe you should know, Mr. Clark died in that apartment last year. Heart attack. They didn't find him for 3 days. I didn't ask any more questions. I just nodded and went back inside my own place. That night, I didn't hear any footsteps. No humming. Nothing. For the first time in weeks, I slept straight through until morning. The strange part is, things felt better after that. My headache stopped. The air in the apartment felt lighter, cleaner. But every once in a while, when I'm half asleep, I still hear faint humming through the wall. It doesn't scare me anymore. In a weird way, it's comforting. Like he's still there, keeping me company. Sometimes I even hum back. I know how that sounds. Crazy, right? But after living alone for so long, I've learned that sometimes the quietest places aren't really empty. Sometimes the things we hear in the dark aren't trying to hurt us. They just don't want to be forgotten. And neither do I. I've kept that apartment ever since. The rent never went up, and no one's asked to see 3A. If you drive by on a rainy night, you might notice one window glowing faint blue from an old TV. Don't worry about it. He's fine up there. And so am I. Story 10. My hobby nearly summoned a demon. There really is no better way to say it. I came very close to summoning a demon, thanks to my hobby. This disastrous hobby happened to be antique collecting. Yep, who knew shopping for old coins and jeweler caskets could be so life-threatening? Well, for 10 plus years it wasn't. Then last month, I was just looking around yard sales and antique stores in my city, as I usually do when I get paid and have a day or two off work. There's a few places near my house that I frequent, and I'm on a first-name basis with the staff in each of them. Sounds quite sad, but believe it or not, it's a fulfilling hobby. I tend to look for metalwork, coins, silverware, knives, stuff like that. Within a couple years of buying from sales and visiting local auctions, I managed to mostly fill my basement with shelves and tabletops with plenty of specimens. I didn't really have a plan for what to do with them. I guessed I would start selling them on at some point when I ran out of room, but I still had some space in the basement, so I wasn't stopping just yet. One day, I stopped by one of my local antique stores and started with the usual small talk with the lady working the counter. I asked if she had anything new in recently. She did. First, she showed me over to a display case full of old pocket watches. She pointed out the newest one, which I gave a quick look, then a polite nod as she moved on to the next thing. Clockwork wasn't really for me. The lady took me to a different room, where I found plenty of new pieces. Some silver goblets, cutlery sets, bracelets, brooches, and some rusty arrowheads and bullet casings that some metal detectors must have dug up in a field somewhere. On a normal day, I would have jumped at the opportunity to buy half of her stock and blow half of my wage for that month. But on that particular day, I just wasn't feeling any of it. When I told her, she was a little puzzled. She knew me, and she also knew that I loved stuff like this. She stood for a moment, thinking, then her eyes squinted and a smirk curled her mouth. "Follow me." I did. She led me behind her counter and into the back room, where she kept tons of stuff she didn't have the space to put out on display. Loads of interesting things caught my eye and lots of metalware, but none of it kept my attention for long. The lady reached high up on a shelf and pulled out a black box, a little larger than a book. My attention was immediately and intensely fixated on this object. She placed it on the countertop and pulled the lid off. In the black box, a knife was revealed. It was beautiful and ornate, with a gold handle and red gemstones worked into it. I had never seen anything so captivating. The lady said, "I kept this back here for you. I figured you would want to see it." Until she spoke, I had forgotten that I was in an antique shop. None of the metal, silver, gold, copper, or bronze pieces around me mattered anymore. All that mattered was this knife. I bought it on the spot. Looking back now, I was out of character. But at that moment, I felt like I hit the jackpot. I rushed home in my car and flew downstairs to the basement, where I picked out a nice spot for the blade on its own shelf. It wasn't as expensive as I was expecting. since the store clerk marked the price down a bit when she saw how enthusiastic I was about it. I'm sure she was just trying to help me out. Or maybe she felt just as compelled to sell it to me as I was to buy it from her. A couple days went by, and I didn't think much about the knife. By the third or fourth day after buying it, however, I felt the urge to buy again. Of course, that was perfectly normal for me, especially after finding something so amazing. I went to another store the next day and started looking around. I didn't really go to the specific store very often, maybe once every 6 or 7 months. It was in a dingy area and was right next to a liquor store that tended to attract undesirables. But for some reason, I felt like going there that day. The clerk had a very nice collection. A brilliant metal lampshade from the 70s, a couple good-looking Civil War revolvers, a weird little chess set made of titanium. All very cool, but nothing I felt like buying. I went up to the guy at the desk, who was arranging some old coins in his gloved hands. He saw me approach and put the coins down with a smile. Then I asked a question. Anything new and recently? He thought for a second before responding. Well, most of the new stuff's already out in the cases. A couple Victorian lock boxes. Few medals from the Second World War over there. I was about to thank him and walk away, when he stopped me with another string of words. But I do have this one thing. Came in yesterday. Just haven't had a chance to price it yet. Come with me. I followed him upstairs into a storeroom full of stacked boxes and scattered trinkets of all varieties. As soon as he fished a small, pale wooden box out of one pile, I felt the same fixation as I had felt with a knife. He opened it to reveal a dainty necklace with a shimmering silver chain, haphazardly strewn within the box. I wanted it. He was more than willing to haggle for a price. When it was settled, I walked out, got in my car and drove home to place the new pale box right beside the black box of the knife. A couple days later, the shelf collapsed. The 2 boxes fell to the concrete basement floor and splintered into pieces. When I eventually came down and found what had happened, the knife and necklace were out of their boxes and loose on the floor. I had no spare boxes or containers on hand to put them in until I could buy new ones, so I simply placed the items on the table by the wall. The plan was to buy new boxes for them and return them to shelves, but I got distracted halfway through ordering them and I never ended up getting any. The fact is, they made me forget. They wanted to be out in the open, instead of buying new boxes. I went online for more locations where I might find more things to buy. Things started getting a little strange in my house at that point. Doors slamming, and picture frames falling from walls. I just chalked it up to a strong breeze and bad hanging nails. Over the next week and a half, I bought another 2 items. A gold ring and a medieval European coin, both equally beautiful must-haves. After buying each one, I placed them all on the table in the basement, beside the necklace and knife. I took the new items out of their boxes, since they all looked so nice together in the open. I couldn't help but think to myself how much nicer they would look with one more item to complete the collection. Except, I didn't know what the last item would be, or what kind of mismatched collection I was assembling. That night, as I lay in bed, I saw someone in my house. At first, I thought I saw a dark stain on the wall, long and slender. I thought to myself how I had never noticed it. Was it mold, ripped wallpaper? Then I saw a human shadow cast against the wall, and I thought my jacket, hung on its hook, was catching the moonlight through the window. Then my eyes focused, and I saw the dark figure standing in my doorway. I lay in bed paralyzed, unable to move as the dark thing looked at me with eyes it didn't have, before receding from view without sound. When it was gone, I slowly found feeling in my limbs again, but I still didn't move. I stayed there all night, watching the door, waiting for that shadowy person to return. It didn't. I was so willing to disprove what I had seen with my own eyes, that I managed to convince myself that it was sleep paralysis. I mean, it basically was, except the fact that I knew it wasn't. I just wasn't prepared to admit it. That same morning, I went online and looked for another antique store. I was presented with a list of places all within 10 miles of my house. I picked one at random and drove there. Clearly, it wasn't random. Clearly, I was meant to go there. When I arrived, the old man at the counter saw me and greeted me. He pointed out how tired I looked with my dark, baggy eyes. I said I hadn't slept, done with the small talk. I asked if he had anything new in stock. Yeah, I've got a couple things in the back. I followed him. When he opened a drawer and lifted a book out of it, I found myself short of breath, wanting nothing more than to buy the book. The man started talking about the brown, dusty book in his hands, and I was surprised he knew anything about it. The other 4 items I bought had hardly any historical information known about them. I listened as he spoke. This book is apparently one of one. Never mass-produced. Never even copied, apparently. This is the only one of its kind. Now I thought he was just trying to upsell it to me or give himself an excuse to charge an extortionate price. He carried on. The text is in a dead language somewhere between Russian and Latin, so no one has managed to translate it. I was losing interest by this point, not taking my eyes off the book in his hands. It's apparently haunted, you know? Excuse me, that's the very last thing I expected to hear. Yeah, some say it's imbued with a demonic presence. I got it looked at by a spiritualist a couple years ago who agreed. They said that it's a totem that belonged to a cult. His words were starting to blur together. My breathing was quickening, and my blood raced the longer I stood looking at the book. The longer that book wasn't in my hands. Any sane person would have walked out as soon as he mentioned the cult. I, on the other hand, asked for a price and bought the book. As I was walking out of the place, I stopped and turned back to clerk. You mentioned a spiritualist before. Are they nearby? Sure enough, she was a few doors down. Here's what she told me. The book I had just bought was supposedly imbued with the soul of a demon. Well, one part of its soul. 1/5 to be specific. She told me about the historical accounts of the cults that worshiped the demon, and how it was fated to rise again once all 5 totems were collected from the ends of the earth and placed beside one another on an even ground. Somehow, these items have found their way to my local area over the years, and were now infiltrating my mind, influencing me to assemble them and, well, summon a demon. I left that place lightheaded. I drove home without thinking, barely breathing. When I pulled into my drive and turned off the engine, it was only then that I realized the gravity of what I had done. I had brought the book home. There was an intense feeling compelling me to bring the items together, to see them all beside one another on the table, to complete the collection. I had to fight that urge. I had to fight even harder to toss the book into the street. My stomach sank like a stone when the book hit the ground, and its pages splayed open, fluttering in the breeze. That night, I locked myself in my bedroom, dreading another visit from the shadowy man. Visit me he did. He stood over me in the night, as I lay still, unable to move, no matter how much I desperately tried. The phantom lifted its misty arm and brought it down on my shoulder. There was a sudden and intense pain, like a candle flame being held against my skin for longer than I could bear. I couldn't scream, so I just cried as I looked up at the thing. Its arm shot back, and I bolted to my feet with the worst boiling pain I've ever felt. The figure was gone as I stood. When I checked my arm and shoulder in a mirror, I saw a giant red gash running with dark blood. By the time the sun rose in the sky, I had crudely patched up my arm with the few bandages I had in my first aid kit. I sat for a long time on my couch, thinking about what to do. Eventually, I called 911. I honestly don't know why. What could they possibly do? I guess I just needed some company while I suffered. I told them about the gnarly gash in my arm, and they said they'd bring some paramedics, which I wasn't at all opposed to. Then there was a knock at the door. I opened it to my neighbor. He held the book in his hands. Hey, sorry to bother you. Is this yours? I think you might have dropped it on your way in. I had no idea what to say. I wanted to say no, but something in the back of my head, something down in the basement, told me to take it from him. Yeah, thanks. No problem, dude. Take care now. As I started to close the door, I felt so alone, but I wasn't. The phantom was back. It stood at the far end of the hall, watching me. It pointed to the basement door. Between me and it, my mind raced. Could I make it to the oven? Could I burn the book? As this thought crossed my mind, the specter took a step towards me, as if it knew what I was thinking, and warned me not to try it. It pointed at the basement door again, and it opened, and I had an overwhelming desire to go down and see my collection finally completed. I took the first step without knowing it had been taken, my fingers still gripping the front door, which creaked open as I let go to take my second step. I was losing my grip on myself. Any ideas of rebelling were gone from my mind, as the rush of getting downstairs fueled me. I descended the steps, and was joined once more by the shadow when I reached the bottom, watching me from a corner of the room. I ignored it, focusing my full attention on the table with the coin, ring, necklace, and knife. The knife. I regained consciousness for a split second as a fleeting thought popped into my head, and in that same instant, I felt a searing pain in my back. The phantom, now behind me, looming over me, clearly didn't like the idea of me killing myself with that knife. The pain intensified, flowing up and down my back in what I could only imagine as a giant wound running the length of my spine. My choice was die or summon a demon. I had no way of knowing what would happen to the totems after I died. I could only hope that someone would separate or destroy them. It wouldn't matter to me. At that moment, my mind was made. Now or never. I thought, swiping the knife off the table and stabbing it into my arm and slashing downwards. The pain got so intense that I couldn't stand up any longer, collapsing to my knees and then onto my side. The beating of blood in my ears grew louder as the pain swelled, then began to subside as I lost more blood. Then, the table broke one of its legs, collapsing to the floor and casting the cursed antiques across the ground around me. The totems were together, but according to the spiritualists, needed to be resting together on the same even surface for the demon to rise. The gold hilt of the knife sticking out of my wrist was already touching the ground, but I couldn't let the book do the same. I held in my free hand, which was now being burned hot by the phantom, desperate to make me drop it to the floor. The shadow lost its humanoid form, becoming a cloud of vapor, filling the air with black smoke that burned like fire across my entire body. Despair fell over me, chilling my blood as I began to picture my own death, lie in a pool of blood in the smoky basement, which would soon be the birthplace of a demon. My eyes started to go, as the totems lay soaking in a slowly expanding pool of my own blood. Every fiber of my being told me to drop the book and complete the collection. Then, from off in the distance, I felt vibrations through the house. They got closer, and I realized they were voices. The phantom gave one last sting of unimaginable agony concentrated in my hand as the paramedics got me up onto a stretcher and marched me upstairs. I still clutched the book in my hand as they got me outside, and as soon as I felt the cool air on my face, I blacked out. I came to my senses in a hospital bed. I felt dreadful. I had all kinds of lines and drips feeding into me and a heart monitor to my side to let me know I was somehow still alive. I glanced down and saw that my hand was wrapped tight with bandages. In that second, I realized the book was no longer in it, and I frantically looked around for it. A nurse saw me struggling and asked me what was wrong. "Your book?" she said. "It's okay, sir. Your book is right there on your bed table." I turned and breathed a deep sigh of relief as I saw the book lying on the table beside a vase of flowers. The pages of the brown book were dark red with my dried blood. "Sorry, sir," the nurse continued. "I'm afraid we weren't able to save it from being soaked." I laughed at what she said. I laughed and cried. When I finally got out of the hospital some days later, I held the book in my hands. Even then, I felt the demon's grasp. I wanted to bring it home. My wound stung with fresh pain, distant pain, like thin tendrils trying to wrap me up and pull me back to the basement. It was a dark evening when I got out, and from the other side of the hospital parking lot, I could see a couple of homeless guys huddled around a flaming bin, vying for warmth. I was cold too, I thought. I could use some warmth. I walked over, a task that felt like it took years, and when I eventually made it to the flaming bin, I threw the book in without a second thought. As it flew through the night air, I felt a dull, spiteful burning in my back, but once the book descended into the fire, the pain was gone. I stayed, watching for long enough to see the pages crinkle into black nothingness. Only then could I be sure it was done. I got home in the early hours. My door was closed, taped up by the police. I pulled it down and came in. As of writing this out, locked in my bedroom. There's no signs of the phantom. Tomorrow I'm planning on getting those blood-soaked antiques in a garbage bag and driving them to the sea. The police are probably going to have some questions for me, and I'm probably not going to have the answers they want to hear. I'm not sure what answers I'll give them. I'm not quite sure of anything anymore, all except for one thing. I need a new hobby.